Chapter 1538. The realm he had reached was the highest realm in the world. However, when he left the central plains and headed north to the northern border, Ishinishidu encountered a person, a Han. The moment Ishinishidu saw him, he sensed that this person was extremely powerful, much stronger than any opponent he had encountered before. Ishinishidu chased him for 10 days and 10 nights, all the way from the northeast to the northwest. Only when he got close to the western regions did he force him to fight. Wang Chong's eyes widened at Bagushida's mention of the northwest, as if he had sensed something. Bagushida hadn't given a detailed explanation, but Wang Chong could already guess at some of the details. The moment the two clashed, Ishinishidu realized that this person was using a martial art that was completely different from the martial arts of the Turks, the Central Plains, the Uzan, or the Arabs that he knew of. Let alone seeing it, he had never even heard of it. Moreover, this person's stellar energy was extremely young and unyielding. Not only was it powerful, it could even refine his opponent's attacks. Ishinishida's cultivation has already reached a transformative level, and his stellar energy has become extremely dense. But when he attacked, 70 to 80% of his stellar energy was dissipated by him, and he even used it against him. After all, Ishinishidu had already reached the subtle realm of dark radiant heaven. If he hadn't reached this level, he would have been even less of a match. But even so, it's already a huge shock to him. Ishinishidu is knowledgeable. He has read countless books on the martial path, but none of them mention anything related to this technique. The more Ishinishidu fought, the more alarmed he became. He knew that he had probably encountered a true hidden expert of the Central Plains. That person had an endless array of martial arts, none of which Ishinishidu had ever seen before. The two exchanged more than 1,000 blows, but not only did Ishinishidu fail to win, he even ended up on the back foot. Such a thing had never happened before. In the end, the mysterious man took the initiative to stop fighting, saying that he did not like to kill, had no interest in fame and fortune, and did not want to fight to the death with anyone. He hoped that everyone would stop when the time was right. Ishinishidu sincerely admired that person's character, and the mysterious expert also felt sympathetic towards Ishinishidu because of his great strength. The two of them didn't get to know each other without fighting, and they actually became close friends because of this. But then something happened. That person seemed to have misunderstood Ishinishidu, and the two of them fought and became enemies. Ishinishidu felt very pained and regretful about this matter. However, the other party's misunderstanding of Ishinishidu was so deep that he didn't listen to Ishinishidu's explanation and directly jumped into a cave. Ishinishidu had no choice but to jump down with him and chase after him. A hint of regret appeared in Bagushida's eyes, as if he was regretting the falling out between friends. But before Bagushidu could finish, Wang Chong interrupted him. If my guess is right, that mysterious person you speak of is the Origin Immortal Lord's 6th generation disciple. Wang Chong had exposed the mystery with a single sentence. He had chased Ishinishidu from the northeast to the northwest, neutralized his opponent's energy, and had also revealed that Ishinishidu had died on the stone bridge, leading to the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury. One didn't even need to think to realize that this mysterious person was the Origin Immortal Lord's 6th generation disciple, the 6th generation successor, who had killed the Four Ends martial lord with a single palm strike. Ishinishidu's invasion of the Central Plains had caused such a huge uproar that not even Wang Chong had imagined that he would encounter the 6th generation successor of the Origin Immortal Lord on his way home. It was no wonder that so many experts of the Central Plains had failed to find him, or even find any information about him. How many people could even come into contact with the state teacher of the Eastern Turks? But to Wang Chong, there was something else that he despised the most. The people of the Origin Immortal Palace are ignorant of the ways of the world, and have never had much interaction with the martial arts world of the Central Plains. And based on what you said, given Ishinishidu's personality, since he knew of the existence of the Origin Immortal Art, he would have sought guidance and discussion with the successor of the Origin Immortal Art. Martial arts are never taught to outsiders, and the Origin Immortal Art is one of the supreme arts of the Central Plains. ranked first among the 10 great arts. Ishinishido wanted to directly ask for it, but there was no such reason. Since Ishinishido couldn't obtain it, he would have to think of another way. If my guess is correct, Ishinishido took advantage of the moment the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art was off guard to ambush him. This is the only way to explain why the 6th-generation successor died here 200 years ago. Bagushido, your skin is truly thick. You're able to speak of such a shameless matter in such an open and above-board manner. What mutual appreciation, and falling out because of a misunderstanding. I truly admire you. Wang Chong's words were brimming with derision as he laid bare the truth. If it was just a small misunderstanding, then everything in the world could be categorized as a misunderstanding if one forsook one's morals and pursued one's enemies, all the way to the origin immortal palace 16,000 meters beneath the ground. This is a matter from several hundred years ago. Whether it's good or bad, isn't it up to future generations to judge? Is there any need to take some things so seriously? Bagushido was not angered by Wang Chong's revelation. He only faintly smiled and brushed the matter aside. In short, the patriarch of our Earth sect followed us here. But alas, the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art was too shrewd. He used all sorts of traps to deal with Ishinishido. But in the end, Ishinishido neutralized all of them. This was also Ishinishido's first time seeing so many unknown secrets deep underground, and it was an eye-opener for him. Thus, he was in no rush to explain himself. On the way here, Ishinishido dealt with every move that came his way, and the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art had no effect on him. Unexpectedly, the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art became suspicious and led him to the core of the origin immortal treasury, where he used an extremely powerful weapon to kill Ishinishido on the stone bridge. The most outstanding state teacher of our Turkic Khaganate from 200 years ago ended up slumbering underground. A truly regrettable death. More importantly, with Ishinishido's death, the influence of the Earth sect and the entire Sun Holy Mountain was greatly weakened. From then on, there was no more state preceptor for the next 200 years. Later on, the Eastern and Western Khans removed the title of state teacher. Our Earth sect was unable to recover from this setback and declined to this point. Bagushido couldn't help but sigh dejectedly. He had personally experienced the decline of the Earth sect. Furthermore, as the current sect master of the Earth sect, he was far more shocked than anyone else when he spoke of such matters. Wang Chong was indifferent. It was rare for Bagushido to reveal his true feelings in front of a Han. Wang Chong could sense that Bagushido was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Even as an enemy, Wang Chong had to admit that this Earth sect master of the Eastern Turks was completely different from any opponent he had ever faced. There was a grace and bearing about him that no one else had. In the end, all of this is just your imagination. You didn't see it with your own eyes. And all these stories are based on conjectures and reasonable conjectures. There's no concrete evidence, so they naturally can't be taken as true. Wang Chong suddenly said, Haha, how do you know that I didn't see it with my own eyes? Bagushido suddenly turned his head and gave Wang Chong a deep glance, his lips curling into a smirk. Wang Chong's heart thumped, and he was momentarily speechless. The story of the Eastern Turks state teacher Ishinishido and the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art had taken place more than 200 years ago, and no one could have seen it with their own eyes. But Bagushido's expression, it made Wang Chong's hair stand on end, and it didn't seem like he was just saying it. But how could such a thing be possible? On the other side, Bagushido turned his head back to the thick fog and began to speak, no longer paying attention to Wang Chong. Ishinishido was heavily injured and knew that he didn't have long to live, but he had spent his entire life practicing martial arts and was deeply obsessed with it. How could he be willing to pay such a heavy price, even losing his life here? Moreover, the more he fought with the 6th-generation successor of the origin immortal art, the more he realized just how broad and profound this art was. As such, before he died, he gathered all of his power and used the supreme secret technique of our Earth sect to seal all of his experiences and half of his power into the 3 earthen blood cauldrons. Then he passed through the layers of rocks and delivered them to the two servants who had been following him all this time. Bagushadu slowly recounted the history of the Earth sect. But toward the end, Bagushadu said nothing more. There were some things that needed to be said here, and there was no need to add more. When Bagushadu had passed through so many dangers and arrived at the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury, stood on the stone bridge, and witnessed with his own eyes the corpse of the state teacher of the Turks, Ishinishadu, accomplishing what none of the Earth sect masters had been able to do in the last 200 years, Bagushadu seemed to be in urgent need of an audience to share his story. And Wang Chong, the king of foreign lands of the Tang dynasty, was the best audience. After all, he was about to die. Wang Chong said nothing, but his mind was in turmoil. At this moment, he finally understood why Bagushadu had appeared here, why he had a treasure map, and why he had been able to use the art of the dark heaven to foresee the traps and get to this place before anyone else. The events from 200 years ago had been reincarnated, and in the end, they had returned to this place. Chapter 1539. Bagushadu held Wang Chong in the back, as the two of them brushed past Ishinishada's corpse. This time, Bagushadu didn't even glance at it. Only Wang Chong subconsciously turned his head. Ishinishada's back was domineering and disdainful. Even after more than 200 years, his clothes in tatters, that tyrannical aura of a man who fought against the heavens had never changed. But when Wang Chong turned to face him, everything changed. Ishinishada's eyes had turned into black skulls, and as he stared up into the sky, he seemed to be preparing to throw the 3 earthblood cauldrons to the ground at the last moment. But when Wang Chong passed him, he saw a frightening sight. Ishinishada's chest had been completely cut open by a sharp blade, his ribs completely pulverized. It was a gruesome sight to behold. Anyone who had suffered such a grievous injury, let alone Ishinishadu, would surely die. It was no wonder that he had chosen to seal all his energy and memories into the 3 blood cauldrons. But a few moments later, Wang Chong was pulled by a powerful force to follow Bagushadu. Bagushadu, I've heard the story of your Earth sect. Why did you capture me? If you want to kill me, then do it. Don't play any more tricks. Even if I fall into your hands, I won't be able to escape. Wang Chong was forced to follow Bagushadu, but he still had a strange feeling. Based on what he had said, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, Osmish included, viewed him as a thorn in their side. If Bagushadu wanted to kill him, he could have done so directly. There was no need for him to play so many tricks, no need for him to say so many things. Heh, you'll soon find out what I want you to do. Bagushadu grinned, an unfathomable expression on his face. Without another word, he led Wang Chong to the end of the stone bridge. The entire core of the treasury was silent, with the second-generation successor standing guard outside. No other martial artists could break in for the time being. Wang Chong and Bagushadu walked side by side, their footsteps echoing across the stone bridge. Clatter, clatter, clatter. From afar, the sound of chains shaking and swaying could be heard. The sound of the chains was particularly strange, and it instantly attracted Wang Chong's attention. We're here. At this moment Bagushadu spoke. The stone bridge was shrouded in mist, making it impossible to see his master and the chief of Wuxiang. Bagushadu's face was also faintly discernible in the mist, giving him an air of mystery. The cold winds caused Bagushadu's black robe to flap in the wind, but Bagushadu continued to stare forward in fascination. King of foreign lands, I'm afraid that our fate ends here. There was something special about Bagushadu's expression. So in the end you chose to take action here? Wang Chong sneered, not a shred of fear in his eyes. His gaze quickly swept across the surroundings. The green stone bridge had already come to an end here. At the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong saw 2 chains as thick as a child's arm, extending into the mist. The clattering sound that Wang Chong heard previously came from the vibrations of these chains. No one knew where these chains led, and everything here was shrouded in a veil of mystery. Wang Chong faced the cold wind as he stood at the top of the stone bridge. Even now, he still didn't understand why Bagushadu hadn't killed him, nor did he understand what Bagushadu wanted to do. Perhaps he wanted something from him. Do you see over there? While Wang Chong was at his most confused, a familiar voice rang out in his ear. Bagushida's robes flapped in the wind as he extended a finger and pointed forward. Back then, the patriarch of our Earth sect, Ishinishidu, was just a little bit away from obtaining the origin immortal art and everything here. Alas, he ran into that sword in the end. That sword was so powerful that even Ishinishidu, who had already broken into the dark radiant heaven, was no match for it. In the end, he was heavily injured by that divine sword and lost his life. Rather than saying that Ishinishidu lost to the origin immortal lord's successor, it would be better to say that he lost to that divine sword. Wang Chong did his best to look ahead, but the vibrating chains and the thick mist made it impossible for Wang Chong to see anything. A moment later, Wang Chong tried to send out his enormous psychic energy, but he quickly sensed a powerful psychic seal. This psychic seal was dozens of times larger than the one Wang Chong had sensed in the cave. Wang Chong had barely sent out his psychic energy when it was shattered by this energy. Wang Chong frowned, a very strange feeling in his heart. The psychic seal in this area had the same effect of disrupting psychic energy as the one he had encountered in the cave, but its structure and form were completely different from the psychic seal Wang Chong had encountered before. This energy was like fish scales, randomly distributed in the air. It was a completely different form of psychic seal. Not only that, although Wang Chong felt that this psychic seal was extremely powerful, Wang Chong hadn't sensed it when he first entered the core. In other words, this psychic seal had a range, and it wasn't very large. Whoosh. But at this moment, a majestic bolt of stellar energy howled out of Wang Chong's side, plunging into the thick mist like a bolt of lightning. Flap flap. A fierce gale stirred up by a mere wave of Bagushida's sleeve was enough to scatter the mist in front of him. A moment later, in the depths of the fog, Wang Chong suddenly saw a tall figure, indistinct and lofty like a mountain. This person stood on one foot, and when Wang Chong looked over, he saw that this person was also looking at Wang Chong and Bagushidu. Not even Wang Chong was prepared for this, and he was given a fright. But Wang Chong quickly realized something. First generation. Wang Chong's heart thumped as he called out. When Bagushida's sleeve emerged, when the mist was at its thinnest, Wang Chong could see the golden origin immortal insignia on his chest. Although this person was standing there motionless, and Wang Chong couldn't sense any living energy from him, this person gave off the same feeling as the other generations of walking corpses. These walking corpses were not ordinary corpses. They had special seals in their bodies that could not be changed. Wang Chong had encountered the 6th generation successor, the 5th generation successor, and even the 3rd generation and 2nd generation successors. But in the entire core region, he had not seen any of the origin immortal lord's 1st generation disciples. Wang Chong had almost believed that the origin immortal lord's 1st generation disciple wasn't even here. But he had never imagined that this 1st generation walking corpse would appear before him in this manner. The origin immortal lord's 2nd generation disciple had already reached the subtle realm, and when paired with the origin immortal art, which was the strongest fighting force in the world, his fighting ability was unparalleled. The 2nd generation disciple was so powerful that not even Wang Chong and the evil emperor, who had captured the 3rd generation disciple, wanted to make an enemy out of him. And the 1st generation was even stronger than the 2nd generation, so one could easily imagine how terrifying his strength was. The king of foreign lands is truly intelligent. That person truly is the origin immortal lord's 1st generation disciple. As the origin immortal lord's 1st generation disciple, the trial he guards is not in the underground palace, but here. But what I need you to do is not to defeat the 1st generation disciple. Do you see that sword in front of him? I want you to take that sword for me. At this moment, Bagushida's familiar voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. Wang Chong looked carefully, and sure enough, Wang Chong saw a sword around 4 feet long in front of the 1st generation disciple. Nearly half of the sword was thrust into the ground. But at this moment, Wang Chong finally saw what was at the end of the chain. An altar. Wang Chong's body trembled as he recognized what it was. It was a massive altar floating in the air, constructed from gray stone. Whether it was the towering 1st generation disciple, or the divine sword that Bagushida spoke of, they were both standing in front of this altar. Wang Chong estimated that this massive altar weighed more than 10 tons, and its surface was covered in mysterious green inscriptions that exuded an extremely ancient aura. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Wang Chong would have found it very difficult to believe that such a heavy object could float in the air, seemingly unaffected by the surrounding stellar winds. Buzz! In an instant, the dense fog surged in again, like a curtain slowly being drawn, and the huge altar, the first generation of zombies, and the 4-foot-long sword at the front were once again hidden in the fog. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Both Wang Chong and Bagushidu stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Lord State Preceptor's martial arts are unparalleled. With your art of dark heaven, it should be easy for you to capture a sword. Wang Chong suddenly broke the silence, his voice tinged with derision. Haha, if only this matter were that simple, this king would not have troubled the king of foreign lands. Bagushidu grinned, paying no heed to Wang Chong's derision. His martial arts, temperament, and bearing had long ago reached a level of steel. How could he be shaken by a few words from Wang Chong? Moreover, Wang Chong's life was in his hands. No matter how angry he was, Bagushidu wouldn't be surprised. Bang! Bagushidu didn't wait for Wang Chong's question. He stepped forward, sending a thick stream of stellar energy through the chains. Whoosh! The chains shuddered under Bagushidu's feet, but at the same time, a metallic clanging resounded in his ears. Chapter 1540. At the same time, Wang Chong's mind was filled with alarm. He felt like he had been locked onto by thousands of sharp energies, and in just a moment, he would be struck by a thunderous blow and torn to shreds. What is this? Wang Chong couldn't help but ask, blinking. The sword mound. You can also call it the Origin Immortal Sword Formation, Bagushidu said. All of you should have already encountered the second generation. The second generation is also known for his swordsmanship, but what you don't know is that the second generation's swordsmanship originated from the first generation. This swordsmanship uses millions of broken swords, and treasured swords as its medium. When activated, it is like a torrential downpour of peerless power. The first generation's supreme intelligence and comprehension, combined with the Origin Immortal Lineage's techniques, and his own fortuitous encounters, allowed him to create this supreme sword art. This is also the highest sword Dao of the Origin Immortal Lineage. As Bagushidu spoke, he extended his left hand and lightly waved it in front of him. In a flash, the mist in the area seemed to be stirred by an invisible hand, and a moment later, countless swords, broken swords, and swords appeared in front of Wang Chong like stars, extending from several dozen feet in front of the stone bridge into the depths of the mist. Even with Wang Chong's abilities, he wasn't able to tell how many broken swords there were in the area. All of these swords, and broken swords were swimming in the void like a school of sharks in the sea. This was a grand and shocking sight that made one's hair stand on end, and one felt a fear and insignificance that came from the depths of one's heart. The first generation is different from the previous generations. My art of dark heaven has no effect on him. If I step into this area, I will immediately be attacked by the first generation. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You don't think that you can easily obtain the Origin Immortal Art by doing nothing, do you? You're the future state teacher of the Turks. Do you not even have the courage to face the first generation? Wang Chong snorted coldly and mocked. Since they were enemies, Wang Chong knew that Bagushidu would never let him go, so he naturally didn't need to be polite. Hehe, if you knew what kind of person first gen is, you wouldn't say that. Bagushidu wasn't angry, and he confidently spoke to Wang Chong. The Origin Immortal Lord had 6 generations of disciples, but only the first generation was personally taught by him, and only the first generation actually met the Origin Immortal Lord. Even this underground palace and checkpoint were built under the Origin Immortal Lord's decree. My entire life was devoted to the Origin Immortal Lord. I was both his disciple and his staunchest follower. It could be said that without the first generation, this Origin Immortal treasury would not exist. If you want to obtain the Origin Immortal Art, you have to defeat the strongest generation. Bagushidu paused for a moment before continuing. But compared to Gen 1, What worries me the most is the sword in front of him. Sword. Wang Chang's eyes flashed in surprise. He had always believed that the sword was one with the first-generation successor. Or to put it more accurately, that the first-generation successor controlled the sword. But from Bagushida's tone, this didn't seem to be the case at all. That sword is extremely special. Anyone who steps on the chains and gets close to the sword will immediately feel like a dagger is pressed against their back. And the closer they get, the more intense this feeling becomes. Back then, state teacher Ishinishidu overcame all the obstacles in his path, taking a leisurely stroll through the cave. But when he encountered this divine sword, he was only able to take 10 steps before his back became drenched in sweat, and his face paled. This was even more taxing on his energy than fighting with someone else. If not for this, the state teacher would not have died here. I originally believed that after several hundred years, the power of this divine sword would have greatly weakened. But when I stepped on it, I realized that compared to Ishinishida's memories, this divine sword was even stronger. I've only taken 7 steps forward. Halfway through his words, Bagushida suddenly became wary and grinned. In short, the first-generation successor's attack could still be blocked, but with that divine sword, everything is different. One man and one sword have formed the final barrier of the Origin Immortal Treasury. If we don't think of a way to cross this barrier, we will obtain the Origin Immortal Art and the Origin Immortal Pill. The Origin Immortal Pill? Wang Chang's eyes widened as he keenly sensed some new information from Bagushida's words. The existence of the first-generation successor and that divine sword had already left Wang Chang very surprised. As for the immortal pill that Bagushida spoke of, he had never heard of it before. For some reason, Bagushida seemed to know much more than they did. There's no harm in telling you. Bagushida faintly smiled, apparently certain that Wang Chang's death was certain, and that Wang Chang would never be able to escape. Thus, he answered all of Wang Chang's questions before his death. Ever since the Earthblood Cauldron returned to the Solar Holy Mountain 200 years ago, it has gone through 6 or 7 generations of sect masters. Ishinishida's memories have been passed down through these 7 generations. Each generation of the Earth sect master has done everything in his power to collect the secrets of the Origin Immortal Path, attempting to find the secret that caused one of the strongest grandmasters in the history of the Turks, Ishinishidu, to perish in the underworld. It was from that time that our Earth sect put in 100 times the effort to gather information on the sect master. All the rumors of the sects, all the ancient texts, all the unofficial histories, whether they were related to the martial path or not, were collected. Hard work pays off. After expending the efforts of 7 generations of sect masters, we finally found records of the Origin Immortal Lord and his first-generation disciple. Moreover, we unexpectedly discovered that the Origin Immortal Lord had refined a top-class pill called the Origin Immortal Pill. This kind of pill can greatly increase a martial artist's strength, as well as cure all the flaws and diseases in a martial artist's body, as well as all injuries and illnesses. Most importantly, it can greatly increase a martial artist's potential. For those martial artists who have exhausted their potential and whose cultivation has reached the limit and can no longer advance, it can be raised to another level, allowing them to step into a higher realm. This pill is priceless. Ordinary people wouldn't care about it, but you should understand what it means for people like us who have exhausted our potential to obtain an Origin Immortal Pill. Bagushida sternly said, making no attempt to conceal his anticipation and yearning. He was so dazzling that even the lone Silence ancestor, Song Yuani, and the Blackeen ancestor, these titans of the martial arts world of the Central Plains, paled in comparison to him. But only Bagushida knew that he had reached the limit of his cultivation. Besides the Origin Immortal Art, he also had to obtain the 2 remaining immortal pills that the Origin Immortal Lord had left in this cave abode. He had already determined the location of those 2 Origin Immortal pills, but there was no need for Wang Chang to know. Okay, that's all for now. King of Foreign Lands, please. Bagushida faintly smiled, bowed, and gracefully gestured for Tang Wulin to enter. Wang Chang grimaced at this sight. King of Foreign Lands, the final trial of the Origin Immortal Treasury is fraught with danger, and anyone below the peak great general level is doomed to die. But this king believes that what is certain death in the eyes of ordinary people is different for you. The Origin Immortal formation was fraught with danger, and you opened the passage to the Origin Immortal treasury that had not been opened for 200 years. Even those incredibly dangerous traps underground were not able to stop you. I must trouble you to break through the final trial of the Origin Immortal treasury in this king's stead. As Bagushida spoke, his right hand suddenly loosened its grip on Wang Chong's hand. The moment he withdrew his hand, Wang Chong felt the energy in his body loosen. A third of the energy that had been sealed had suddenly been sealed. Wang Chong had finally regained some stellar energy, and was now able to protect himself. This was so sudden that even Wang Chong couldn't help but be taken aback, and for a moment, a hint of astonishment flashed through Wang Chong's eyes. A few moments later, Wang Chong sensed that part of Bagushida's black stellar energy howling down, using a different method to seep into his dantian, and the 6 acupuncture points around it. The dark energy in his dantian, and the 6 acupoints faintly formed an even more powerful sealing art. This is a supreme forbidden art passed down from generation to generation, in our solar holy mountain lineage, the Dark Moon's Blaze. It is also a forbidden art that only the Earth Sect Master has been able to grasp. Starting from now, no matter what tricks you use to escape, I only need to touch the seal to kill you. At this moment, Bagushida's voice rang out in his ear. That's right. By the way, I've also added a drop of my heart's blood into this forbidden art. In other words, if I die, you won't be able to live either. Bagushida faintly smiled and raised a finger. At this moment, Wang Chong could clearly see that a trickle of blood had appeared on Bagushida's finger. The finger was the closest to the heart, and as the saying went, the 10 fingers were connected to the heart, so it was naturally easy to squeeze out a drop of heart's blood. In a flash, Wang Chong's face turned extremely unsightly, his heart sinking to the bottom of the lake. Bagushidu, you really did receive Ishinishida's true legacy. Both of you are equally despicable. Wang Chong sternly said. The king of foreign lands overpraises me. Bagushida chuckled, completely unperturbed. If I were you, I would think of a way to help me pass this trial and obtain that sword. Of course, if you vehemently refuse, I wouldn't mind killing you here and completing my deal with Osmish ahead of time. But I'm sure that you won't do that. After all, no matter how dangerous it is, there's still a sliver of hope, right? Bastard. Wang Chong coldly stared at Bagushidu, his mind seething with hatred. Bagushidu seemed to already have him in his grasp. No matter what he chose, Bagushidu wouldn't lose anything. On the other hand, just as Bagushidu had said, giving up had never been his style. No matter how difficult it was, he had to fight. Chapter 1541. But despite his anger, Wang Chong quickly calmed down. He turned his gaze and quickly looked forward. Even though he was being restrained, he could at least use a portion of his stellar energy. So his situation was much better than before. Can't you let me recover half of my strength? With this little bit of strength, I can't possibly get through the Origin Immortal Sword formation. Wang Chong suppressed his anger and sternly said, no. In any case, whether it's 30% or 50%, you can't stop the Origin Immortal Sword formation. Rather than wasting our efforts like this, what's the point of doing this? Bagushidu shook his head, his tone firm. Wang Chong only coldly snorted. He was only doing his best, and Bagushida's refusal had been within his expectations. Calming himself down, Wang Chong began to examine the 2 thick chains at his feet. If he wanted to get through this trial, and even obtain the Origin Immortal art, these 2 chains would be crucial. Fortunately, they're made of 10,000-year-old cold steel, and have been tempered thousands of times. Moreover, the surface of the chains is covered in many solidified inscriptions, so they won't break easily. Wang Chong recognized them at a glance. His forging of Wuxia steel swords had given him access to many materials, and 10,000-year-old cold steel was one of the most precious and top-class materials. Wang Chong could naturally recognize it at a glance. However, the 10,000-year-old cold steel used in the Origin Immortal Lord's Cave was different from normal. It was of a higher quality, purer, and could be considered one of the best materials. Moreover, the reinforcing inscriptions the Origin Immortal Lord had used on the chains were not the ordinary inscriptions used today, but ones from the spring and autumn era that were 100 times more effective. Just this point alone would make it difficult for even divine weapons to be damaged. But the next moment, when Wang Cheng looked forward, his expression changed. After a few meters, the chain was densely dotted with mottled sword marks. Some of the sword marks were even several inches deep, almost cutting a small section of the chain. Further ahead, the mottled sword marks were a scene of desolation, and there were even more marks. The Origin Immortal Sword Formation. A thought flashed through Wang Cheng's mind, and he immediately thought of the first generation controlling and setting up a huge sword formation here. Hiss! Wang Cheng took a deep breath. First gen strength is simply too strong. I'm afraid that even my Wuxia steel sword won't be able to cut through this 10,000-year cold steel, which is covered in ancient runes. However, first gen relied on his powerful sword chi to almost destroy these two chains. The gap between us is too great. With my current strength, I'm not his match at all. I'm afraid that once he steps onto the chain, the sword formation will activate, and he will definitely die. Wang Cheng's heart was in turmoil. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he quickly looked forward. Whoosh! With a wave of his sleeve, he didn't even need Bagushidu to do anything. Wang Cheng swept away the sea of fog. Wang Cheng had excellent control over his strength, and in the blink of an eye, the fog in front of him was gone. With the clattering of the chains, Wang Cheng once more saw the mysterious altar floating in the air, the first-generation successor, and the mysterious sword thrust into the ground. Everything was blurry and indistinct, so distant that it seemed like another world. And in the fog, the first-generation successor was like a grim reaper from the underworld, savage and terrifying. And the mysterious sword thrust into the ground in front of the first-generation successor was even more indistinct. But when Wang Cheng glanced at that sword, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. For some reason, this sword gave Wang Cheng a strange feeling. This feeling was indescribable, and it only lasted for a moment before vanishing. How strange! Wang Cheng frowned as he muttered to himself. But Wang Cheng quickly came back to his senses. After a few moments of thought, he picked up a few stones from the stone bridge and flicked one of them toward the other side. Clang! A sharp sword light flashed through the air, and the pebble that Wang Cheng had flicked out only managed to fly a short distance before it was cleaved in two and fell to the ground. Wang Cheng's eyes flashed at this sight, and without the slightest hesitation, he flicked his finger, sending another stone flying. And then a second, a third. Wang Cheng continued to pick up stones and throw them out. And then he watched as these stones flew in different directions, and at different heights, sliced into even smaller pieces by the Origin Immortal Sword Formation, and dropped to the ground. Bagushidu coldly watched this entire process, not disturbing him in the slightest. His expression was calm and unperturbed. Only when Wang Cheng flicked out those stones did his expression flicker. No. Once a stone enters the sword formation, it will be attacked. At most, it will be attacked by 56 blades, while at least 7. Wang Cheng held a stone in his hand, his head slightly tilted back, and his eyes closed as his mind rapidly worked. His psychic energy was several times stronger than before, and his calculation ability had also increased. Bagushidu could seal his energy, but he could not seal his psychic energy. In just a few moments, Wang Cheng had used the stone in his hand to calculate many useful things. But even so, the situation was not optimistic. In his current state, he was practically doomed. If he couldn't think of a solution, he would die. Time slowly passed, and finally, a familiar voice rang out in his ear. King of foreign lands, time is limited. Please. Bagushidu faintly smiled. Although the Origin Immortal Lord had left behind many traps that would theoretically make it very difficult to get in, it was better to be safe than sorry. He could not allow Wang Cheng to continue wasting time like this. As long as I can get in, State Teacher shouldn't mind if I use a few tricks, right? At this moment, Wang Cheng grinned, stood up, and turned to Bagushidu. Bagushidu was clearly taken aback, and then he waved his sleeve and chuckled. Ha! As long as you don't have any ideas about me, it's naturally fine. Whoosh! A few moments after Bagushadu spoke, two storms of energy appeared on the stone bridge behind them. A few moments later, the fog parted, revealing two powerful figures. It was Chief Wuxiang and Wang Chang's master, the evil emperor. Their eyes were cold as they glared at Bagushadu. If looks could kill, Bagushadu would have died thousands of times over. What? Do you want your master to go in your place? Bagushadu held his hands behind his back. Not only was he not afraid, he even chuckled and looked at Wang Chong with amusement. How could this be? Probably only your Eastern Turks, the solar holy mountain, would do such a thing. Wang Chong waved his sleeve and faintly smiled. As if in response to his words, the fog behind the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang began to seethe. Thump thump thump. An energy even stronger than the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang strode out from the rear. Amidst the mist, those hollow and lifeless eyes that struck fear in the hearts of the onlookers landed on Bagushadu, the third-generation successor of the origin immortal lord. Earlier, in order to guard against any hidden dangers, Wang Chong had deliberately brought the third-generation successor out of the passage. He hadn't expected for Bagushadu to take advantage of this opening and capture Wang Chong. The third-generation successor didn't even have a chance to strike. Upon seeing the third-generation successor, Bagushadu's faint smile finally vanished, and he no longer appeared as relaxed as he had been before. Bagushadu was still somewhat apprehensive of these disciples of the origin immortal lord. Wang Chong, if I were you, I would be very careful, Bagushadu said as he stared at the imposing third-generation successor. Hey, state teacher, are you afraid that I will use the third-generation successor to attack? As he saw Bagushadu's body stiffen, Wang Chong suddenly smiled, his mind much more relaxed. Bagushadu had schemed against everyone, and even Wang Chong himself had fallen into his grasp. But in the end, he still had things to worry about. Bagushadu's expression flickered, but he quickly smiled. King of foreign lands, you're thinking too much. Don't forget that you have the forbidden art of my earth sect, the dark moon's blaze, in your body. And you're using psychic energy to control the third-generation successor, right? If I use the dark moon's blaze, will you die faster or will I die faster? Will this walking corpse be able to move freely after you die, and attack me as well? Buzz! Wang Chong said nothing, but a harsh light flashed through his eyes. This future state teacher of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate was far more difficult to deal with than he had imagined, and the dark moon's blaze in his body was still a hidden danger. Bagushadu, no one has ever threatened this old man like this. For abducting this old man's disciple, one day, I will make you and your earth sect pay the price. The demonic emperor old man suddenly said, his expression cold. Wang Chong had been abducted right under his nose. Although this had something to do with the fact that he had expended too much energy in the previous battles, this matter still left the evil emperor fuming with unprecedented rage. Ever since he had gone into seclusion, the evil and ruthless aura of the evil emperor had receded, but Bagushadu had succeeded in stimulating the darkest side of his heart. We'll see when the time comes. Chapter 1542. The evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang had hateful expressions on their faces as they silently stood on the stone bridge. Behind them, the third-generation successor began to stride forward, making his way toward Wang Chong and Bagushadu. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. As the third-generation successor approached, Wang Chong's eyes flickered, and an irrepressible thought emerged in his mind. The final trial of the origin immortal treasury was fraught with danger, and Bagushadu was basically forcing him to his death. Rather than being threatened by Bagushadu, it was better to use this chance to deal with Bagushadu. At the very least, he wouldn't be threatened. But the stone bridge was too narrow for his master and the chief of Wuxiang to get close, and Bagushadu was far too powerful. If they rashly attacked and failed, all their efforts would have been for naught. Moreover, even without Bagushadu, Wang Chong wouldn't have been able to avoid this final trial. Unlike Bagushadu, if he didn't obtain the origin immortal art, he would be doomed. Buzz! As Wang Chong was thinking, he heard the clattering of metal. Bagushadu's black stellar energy was surging, And within this stellar energy were 3 small cauldrons covered in blood-colored inscriptions, each as heavy as a mountain. These cauldrons had spread out from Bagushida's body and were guarding him from 3 different directions. A few moments later, Bagushida's body began to swell like a bamboo shoot after the rain. In the blink of an eye, he had reached an astonishing level. Bagushidu had originally only been half a step into the subtle realm, only a sliver away from that level. But with the help of these 3 earthblood cauldrons, he had crossed that threshold, becoming even stronger and more terrifying than the 3rd-generation successor. In a flash, Wang Chong paled, the last bit of thought in his mind dispelled. He was still no match for the future state teacher of the Turks. "Hey, King of Foreign Lands, please." Bagushida's voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. His eyes were fixed on the other end of the mist, his expression relaxed. Wang Chong's mind raced, but in a split second, a smile appeared on his face. He was never one to blame the heavens and others. He only believed in his own strength. Since he couldn't beat them, he might as well settle down and think of a way to cross this natural chasm. As for Bagushidu, he could think of a way to deal with him once he survived. Buzz! Wang Chong shifted his gaze and quickly looked at the opposite side. The 3rd generation and 1st generation both cultivate the origin immortal art, and they share the same origin. I wonder if the 3rd generation's energy will be of any use? In the end, only by challenging the origin immortal formation on the ground would one be able to find out what use the origin immortal formation had. BZZ. Without the slightest hesitation, the 3rd-generation king shot forward like a bolt of lightning, leaving a gust of wind in his wake as he charged past the pair. Bang! The 3rd-generation's foot stomped on the thick chain, causing it to fiercely shake. This simple action immediately attracted everyone's attention. Bagushida's long brows rose in concern. "I wonder if it's effective," Bagushidu quietly said to himself. Bagushidu did not dare to be careless about the thing that had caused Ishinishidu to suffer a crushing defeat. The moment the 3rd-generation's foot stepped forward, the entire trial began to change. Clang! A clear and melodious sword howl suddenly resounded by their ears, and it was a drawn-out sound that broke the silence of the entire space. A moment later, this sword hum multiplied into thousands of swords. Ripples appeared in the originally empty sea of mist, and suddenly, the cries of tens of thousands of swords rang out. The scene from when Bagushidu had challenged the trial once more took place. As far as Wang Chong could see, countless swords, broken swords and damaged swords were like a school of sharks aimed at the 3rd-generation successor at the end of the stone bridge. But unlike Bagushidu, these swords trembled and buzzed, but they did not attack. The warning was far stronger than an actual attack. It seems like Bagushidu was right. The 1st-generation successor's consciousness has already fused with the sword mound. He can even sense the 3rd-generation successor's energy and send out a warning. Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he understood. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong began to move. Boom! The 3rd-generation successor under Wang Chong's control shot forward like a cannonball. Immediately, with a shocking speed, he shot toward the opposite side of the chain. At the same time, there was a flash of golden light and a surge of astral energy. Hundreds of golden compasses shot out from the 3rd-generation successor's body and turned into a golden fortress that surrounded him. With this barrier in place, the 3rd-generation king immediately pushed the stellar energy in his body to the limit, and like a blazing sun, he charged forward with all his might. At this moment, both Wang Chong and Bagushidu began to focus their attention. This chain was only 700 or 800 meters long, and given the 3rd-generation successor's strength, he should only need a few seconds to reach the other side. Success or failure would be determined by this one move. Boom! The 3rd-generation successor took another step forward, his foot landing on the thick chain and causing it to violently shake. And it was this action that immediately triggered the rage of the countless flying swords in the sword tomb. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples, and the number of flying swords in the sea of fog rapidly increased. There was the sound of metal clanging, and in the next moment, there was a wild gale as 10 times the number of flying swords from before shot toward the 3rd-generation king, shining with dazzling golden light. More flying swords were gathering from all directions. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of swords, broken swords and damaged swords shined with a golden light, as they formed an unprecedented storm that spun and shot toward the third-generation king. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen someone capable of controlling so many flying swords at the same time. Each flying sword was as heavy as a mountain, and they flew down like a torrential storm. Boom! 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 In the blink of an eye, the third-generation king's figure was engulfed by the countless flying swords. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fog and golden light greatly hindered Wang Chong's vision, and the powerful psychic seal in the air made it impossible for Wang Chong to use his psychic energy to probe around. But standing at the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong could clearly see the two thick chains beneath his feet, vibrating at an unprecedented rate. The clanking of the chains rang out incessantly, and in the blink of an eye, the third-generation successor zombie had fallen into an extremely dangerous situation. The pull of this abyss was so powerful that not even the third-generation successor could fly into the air. The two narrow chains were constantly vibrating, ready to throw the successor off at any moment. If he fell into the abyss, he would be doomed. Impossible! At this moment, a familiar voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. At some point, Wuxia had walked up to stand next to Wang Chong, his hair dancing in the wind. But he paid no attention to Wang Chong. His attention was completely focused on the third-generation successor, the golden light drawing away all his attention. These walking corpses only have incomplete souls in their bodies, and they're already dead, so they're not affected by the divine swords. In other words, the third-generation successor doesn't need to worry about anything else in this battle. As long as he can defeat the first-generation successor, he can reach the other side. More importantly, he's a successor of the origin immortal realm, so he'll suffer far fewer attacks than we do. Wuxia's eyes shone with excitement. He had originally taken Wang Chong hostage as a test, and it was also for the sake of his deal with Kagan. In any case, he wouldn't suffer any losses, but it now appeared that he had made the correct decision. The third-generation successor had already surpassed him, and Ishinishidu, the patriarch of the Earth sect. Wuxia had just seen a sliver of hope, but a moment later, what happened in the fog obliterated that hope. Buzz! As the third-generation successor advanced along the chain, using the golden compass fortress that could nullify all techniques to fend off the rain of swords, the flying swords in the air began to change. As the pair watched, the origin immortal lord's vast origin energy immediately surged into the thousands of flying swords in the air. In a flash of light, one of the flying swords shooting toward the third-generation successor suddenly began to blaze with light. A hazy light rose from the tip of the sword for more than half a foot, exuding a sharpness that seemed to be able to pierce through metal. Sword chi! Wang Chong's heart trembled and he grimaced. He had the art of god and demon obliteration, so he was extremely familiar with this sort of sword Dao. There were as many flying swords in the air as there were hairs on an ox, and if each one could spit out sword chi, the power of this sword formation would be unimaginable. As if responding to Wang Chong's foreboding, one sword, two swords, three swords. In just a few seconds, the sea of swords, broken swords in the air began to spit out sword chi and explode toward the third-generation successor, their power on a completely different level. Bum bum bum. The flying swords exploded, and the third-generation successor's speed immediately dropped. Not only that, but in the face of the sword chi attacks, the third-generation king was in unprecedented danger. Not only was he unable to advance, but he was also pushed back, almost falling off his chains. It's about time to test the third generation's power. Chapter 1543. If Wang Chong had been forced to do this by Wuxia, Wang Chong's attention was now completely focused on crossing the chasm. If he wanted to obtain the origin immortal art, he had to overcome this chasm. Buzz! In the next moment, the third-generation successor stood in the middle of the chain, several hundred meters away from the stone bridge. He extended a hand, and the radiant 33 heavens immediately gathered together into a massive golden halberd. With a casual blow, The third-generation successor unleashed a torrent of golden energy that, combined with the power of the golden halberd, instantly pulverized the several dozen swords in front of him. The third-generation successor turned around and unleashed another blow. Before the several dozen flying swords could even get close, they were pulverized by the tyrannical origin immortal stellar energy. But this was only the beginning. With the halberd in hand, the third-generation successor's momentum soared, and he took the initiative to attack the tens of thousands of flying swords around him. Boom! Wave after wave of Daluo's astral energy sprayed out. The astral energy rumbled, and even turned into the shape of dragons and tigers, clashing with the flying swords in the air with their fists. The Origin Immortal Lord's disciple had once more displayed his formidable fighting power. Even though he was facing a massive number of flying swords, in this extremely unfavorable environment, the third-generation successor was still able to attack and defend. The swords, broken swords, and damaged swords in the air were destroyed by the third-generation successor, the shards and chains constantly brushing past him and falling into the abyss below. Impossible! Was it broken just like that? Or was I just looking in the wrong direction this entire time? Bagushida muttered to himself. For a moment, he didn't dare to believe that things had gone so smoothly. On the other side, Wang Chong also slightly frowned. Although the current situation was advantageous to him, Wang Chong instinctively felt that the situation was not so simple. The first-generation successor was stronger than the second-generation successor, and he had single-handedly constructed all the mechanisms in the underground palace. The first-generation successor could not possibly pass this trial so easily. Just as this thought flashed across Wang Chong's mind, there was a sudden change in the distance. Sandame's repeated advances and attacks on the flying swords in the air seemed to have finally angered Shizai. Boom! There was an earth-shattering sound, and in the next moment, a huge crack appeared in the air above the chain, and a terrifying energy surged out from the void. Countless golden particles mixed with the mist and attached themselves to the thousands of flying swords in the void. In just a short period of time, the flying swords gave off a completely new feeling. They had actually become even more powerful and dangerous than before. Subtle realm. Wang Chong stood on the stone bridge at the back and watched coldly. He felt it deeply. In that instant, he sensed a familiar aura in the air. It was the power of the nuance realm. However, this power was even more terrifying than the second king in the underground palace. If the second king was a man of steel, then the first king was a giant. Even more frightening was that the subtle realm for ordinary martial artists only raised their strength to a higher level. But the first-generation successor's unique form had completely changed the definition of the subtle realm. The third-generation successor was now facing thousands of subtle realm flying swords, a power that would make any martial artist shrink back and tremble in fear. It's finally here. The nearby Bagushido also sensed this change. He was much stronger than Wang Chong, so he was able to sense it much more deeply. Wang Chong could only sense the subtle realm energy surging through the air, but Bagushido could sense that a massive gate had opened in the depths of space-time. This transcendent energy, more powerful than any martial artist in the world, surged in like massive waves and was absorbed by the Origin Immortal Sword formation. It's this energy. Back then, Ishinishido chased after it for 10 days and 10 nights, all the way to this place. In the end, he died here. Only by comprehending this power, and combining it with the power of our Earth-sexed dark radiant heaven, will we be able to comprehend it and reach another realm. Bagushida's face flickered, and he could no longer maintain his composure. His clothes began to tremble in the mist, making him seem completely different from before. But Wang Chong had no idea that the battle had reached its most intense moment, and the first-generation successor was completely intent on killing the third-generation successor. Buzz! Before one wave had even settled, the first-generation successor had opened a space-time passage. When all the flying swords were advanced to the microscopic level, the golden light was dazzling. In the thick mist, countless broken golden lights suddenly floated up from the bottom of the chain. A single glance caused Wang Chong and Bagushido to grimace. The densely packed, scale-like fragments of golden light were actually countless fragments of the longsword. These fragments were all the flying swords that had been shattered in the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. Not only had the third-generation successor failed to destroy these flying swords, he had only made the sword mound even more dangerous. Clang! Before Wang Chong and Bagushidu could react, countless flying swords gathered together in a dazzling golden light. In the next moment, a huge sword that was over 300 feet long flashed through the air, like a bolt of lightning. In an instant, it struck the third-generation successor on the chain with the power of a thunderbolt. Even the third-generation successor seemed insignificant in the face of this enormous energy. Not good. Wang Chong had an extremely ill foreboding. There was no time to think, and all Wang Chong could do was control the third-generation successor to leap forward with all his strength. Less than half a second later, the third-generation successor seemed to have been struck by a bolt of lightning and vanished into the mist. The battle ended, and everything returned to peace. The surrounding fog gathered, and in the void, the tens of thousands of broken swords and broken swords lost their target. Gradually, the light on their swords faded, and they slowly dispersed into the void around the chain. One by one, they lay dormant and disappeared. Walala, the chain swayed. The sound was loud and clear, but on the stone bridge behind, there was only silence. Wang Chong and Bagushidu stood side by side, silent for a long time. Just like that, the third-generation successor had died. From start to finish, Wang Chong had controlled the third-generation successor to advance, even at the last second. But in the end he had still failed. What a pity! Such a powerful helper, such a powerful fighting force, was lost for nothing. Bagushidu quickly came back to his senses, and smiled at Wang Chong. But Bagushidu's words came to a sudden halt. Next to him, Wang Chong had squatted down, his expression focused as he drew a finger across the stone bridge. Not even Bagushidu could understand the strange symbols and marks he was drawing. This is... Bagushidu frowned and immediately shut his mouth, standing behind Wang Chong as he watched. At this moment, Wang Chong was so focused that he had completely forgotten about Bagushidu. His eyes were half closed, and his mind was constantly replaying the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. The entire battle, every single detail, from the beginning to the end, all appeared in his mind big and small. Although the third-generation successor had been killed by the sword formation, Wang Chong's sacrifice had not been for naught. At the very least, Wang Chong had gained a great deal of information that he had not known before. More importantly, when Wang Chong had controlled the third-generation successor, he had also seen it from the third-generation successor's point of view. He had gained all the experience of fighting the first-generation successor head-on. Not even Bagushidu had experienced this sort of thing. It's not advisable to use brute force. The first-generation successor only used 60% of his strength against the third-generation successor. And this is entirely because he is the successor of the origin immortal realm. If it had been anyone else, the first-generation successor would have been at least 40% stronger. This isn't something that any one of us here can deal with. Wang Chong closed his eyes and slightly raised his head, his mind constantly calculating. Thus, if he wanted to obtain the origin immortal art, he could only do it through wits, not brute force. Crucially, he had to find the pattern of the first-generation successor's attacks. No matter how powerful and intelligent the first-generation successor was, he was still dead, and his mind was bound to be extremely weak after nearly 1,000 years. This was the crux of the problem. The first-generation successor's attacks had a pattern. At the very least, this was what Wang Chong had learned through the third-generation successor's eyes, and it was his greatest harvest. Just what is it? Wang Chong muttered to himself, his mind in turmoil. The third-generation successor was already half a step into the subtle realm, and when combined with the world's #1 origin immortal art, his fighting power was almost on par with the initial realm Kateba, perhaps even a little stronger. Not even the third-generation successor could contend against 60% of the first-generation's attacks, much less Wang Chong himself. If he could not find the first-generation successor's pattern of attacks, recklessly stepping onto the chains would mean certain death. The air was still, and the air was cold as it flowed across the stone bridge. Wuxia stood with his hands held behind his back, his expression indifferent and unhurried. While the third-generation successor was present, he had still had some misgivings. Now that the third-generation successor was gone, Wang Chong's life was even more in his hands. There's no rush. Take your time to think. At the very least, you have enough time before the others come in. Wuxia faintly smiled, exuding a scholarly air. He seemed forgiving, but this was actually his final ultimatum. But at this moment, Wang Chong did not care, nor did he care. What is it? Just what is it? Chapter 1544. Countless battle scenes replayed in his mind in a bizarre manner, reorganizing themselves. All of the long swords, the broken swords, the damaged swords, and even the energy that the first-generation expert used to activate the minute subtlety at the end appeared in his mind. Moreover, in a manner that the martial artists of this world could not understand, he dissected and calculated them. Bystanders, including Wuxia, could only see these scenes, but in Wang Chong's mind, these scenes had transformed into countless numbers. In this aspect, it was somewhat similar to how Wang Chong had used his immense psychic energy to break the origin immortal formation. But it was even stronger now. Time slowly passed, and Wang Chong didn't have much time left. Wang Chong's current strength was simply too weak. He once more recalled the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. Origin. What a powerful sword formation. It's practically endless, and the more I attack, the stronger it gets, Wang Chong mentally sighed. But a moment later, as his gaze swept over the sword mound shrouded in thick fog, Wang Chong's body trembled as he remembered something. No, the origin immortal sword formation, the origin immortal art. As if remembering something, Wang Chong's eyes suddenly brightened. Lowering his head, he extended a strand of sword chi from his finger and began to draw on the stone bridge once more. With the help of the lanterns on both sides of the bridge, Wang Chong was able to draw much more clearly this time. His finger moved to the east and then to the west. Slowly, as Wang Chong drew more and more lines on the stone bridge, it became clearer and clearer. It was a crude origin immortal symbol, just like the symbol on the chest of the sixth-generation successor, though there were some subtle differences. Buzz. Finally, his finger left a crude mark on the stone bridge. Wang Chong's eyes suddenly became clear, and a smile appeared on his face. Lifting his head, he looked ahead. The other side of the stone bridge was still covered in mist, making it difficult to see anything. However, for Wang Chong, he had already seen something different. This was the true operating principle of the origin immortal sword formation. Grand Luo. In both power and form, this sword formation was unlike any other supreme art that Wang Chong had seen before. But at its core, this sword formation shared the same essence as the origin immortal formation that Wang Chong had seen before. The origin immortal formation. As expected, the first generation's cultivation has surpassed all the previous origin immortal successors. He actually took the origin immortal art and the origin immortal formation, these two completely different things, and created the origin immortal sword formation. But the source of all three is exactly the same. Wang Chong's eyes flickered, and his mind immediately became clear. If it were anyone else, even if they had seen some clues from the origin immortal sword formation, they would not have been able to use them, in such a short time, to break the formation. But Wang Chong was different, because he knew the origin immortal art's mantra. Even though it was only the first layer, Wang Chong had already gained an enormous enlightenment. And while Wang Chong was controlling the third-generation successor to fight, he had also gained a thorough understanding of how the origin immortal stellar energy flowed in the successor's body. Just this isn't enough. But a few moments later, Wang Chong's brow furrowed, a shadow flitting across his brow. If he had recovered all his strength, or even reached a higher level, Wang Chong would have chosen to fight to the death. But he had been greatly weakened, and 2/3 of his energy had been sealed. Even though he had vaguely understood the secrets of the origin immortal sword formation, recklessly jumping onto it would still result in death. Wang Chong raised his head, his gaze once more focused on the two chains, and the first-generation successor, and his divine sword. The chance of death is too high, almost 70%. Just how can I get across? Wang Chong muttered to himself, his brow tightly furrowed. The information he currently had was far from enough, and Wang Chong's mind was rapidly turning as he tried to think of a way to safely cross the Origin Immortal Sword formation. But just what should I do? Wang Chong's brow furrowed deeper and deeper. At present, his greatest advantage was that, like the third-generation successor, he had the same Origin Immortal stellar energy in his body. But even the stronger third-generation successor had fallen from the chains, so Wang Chong didn't think that he could easily avoid it. Time slowly passed, and Wang Chong's eyes remained closed as he fell into thought. Whoosh! As Wang Chong's brow furrowed even tighter, a cold wind blew past, causing the mist in the abyss to begin to seethe once more. At this moment, Wang Chong heard a clattering at his ear. It was the sound of the chains shaking. Buzz! As this thought flashed through his mind, Wang Chong's eyes brightened as he thought of something, and his brow slowly relaxed. After once more examining the thick fog and abyss, Wang Chong closed his eyes and began to think for a long time. Finally, he slowly stood up. Are you ready? Bagushida's voice rang out in his ear. He had been observing Wang Chong this entire time, and none of Wang Chong's movements could escape his eyes. What does it matter if I'm ready or not? Nothing will change if I stay here any longer. And if I stay a little longer, will you let me go? Wang Chong indifferently said without turning his head. Bagushidu only faintly smiled and said nothing. Ignoring Bagushidu, Wang Chong took in a deep breath and took a small step forward. Although his words were indifferent, the slight tension in his body revealed his true state. This place was fraught with danger, and every step could doom him to eternal damnation. Not even Wang Chong had much confidence in his next course of action. But if he stuck his head out, he would die, and if he shrank his head, he would die. Wang Chong had no other choice. Buzz! A moment later, as Bagushida watched, Wang Chong stepped forward, placing his foot on the thick chain in front of him. Bagushidu was stunned by this sudden action. He had seen Wang Chong scribble on the ground and then ponder, and at the end, a faint smile on his lips. Bagushidu believed that Wang Chong had found a solution. But Bagushidu had never imagined that Wang Chong's solution would be so simple and crude. This was no different from seeking death. King of foreign lands, you? Bagushidu grimaced, and he subconsciously wanted to call out to Wang Chong. If Wang Chong just walked over, Bagushidu wouldn't be able to find any information on him. But at this moment, Wang Chong seemed to have put Bagushidu to the back of his mind and heard nothing. Before Bagushidu could react, Wang Chong's other foot stepped on another chain. It's over. Bagushida's heart chilled at this sight. The moment he left the range of the stone bridge, the sword formation would immediately be activated, and the first-generation successor would attack. With Wang Chong's meager strength, he wouldn't even be able to last 1 second before being killed. Bang! The moment Wang Chong's last foot stepped on the chain, massive waves of energy surged through the air. Sword chi whistled through the air, and in a few short moments, tens of thousands of swords, broken swords exploded out of the mist and shot toward Wang Chong with the momentum of a thunderbolt. The exact same momentum as when he had dealt with the third-generation successor. Swish, swish, swish. Just when it seemed like Wang Chong was about to be pierced by the 10,000 swords and die on the spot, something unexpected occurred. Wang Chong's body exploded with golden light, and then the Origin Immortal Stellar Energy, identical to the third-generation successors, began to spread across his body. At the same time, Wang Chong lowered his body, and the energy he exuded began to change, going from strong to weak, from weak to nothing. Finally, to Bagushida's shock, Wang Chong fused with the thick chain beneath him. At this moment, Wang Chong had used his immense psychic energy to transform himself into a chain. Even though Bagushidu had made all sorts of preparations and even imagined Wang Chong's fate of being pierced by 10,000 swords, this scene still far surpassed his expectations. For the first time, Bagushidu was caught off guard, and deep shock appeared in his eyes. But even more shocking had yet to come. As Wang Chong completed this series of transformations, The storm of flying swords in the air seemed to lose their target and came to a sudden halt. More than 90% of the flying swords froze in the air, while the remaining swords seemed to sense Wang Cheng's presence. But their speed had dropped by more than 10 times. This small change had instantly reduced the danger that Wang Cheng was facing to an inconceivable level. In the face of these flying swords, Wang Cheng was like a leopard, his body leaping forward and immediately flying toward the other end of the chain. The flying swords brushed past Wang Cheng's back, and Wang Cheng managed to narrowly avoid this attack. How could this be? Bagushadu was dumbstruck. He had imagined 1,000 scenarios in which Wang Cheng would be pierced through, but he had never imagined that things would turn out like this. The scene before him had completely escaped his control, and not even Bagushadu could predict what would happen. What a powerful king of foreign lands! No wonder Osumis and the surrounding kingdoms can't eat or sleep in peace. Bagushadu couldn't help but sigh as he looked at Wang Cheng, whose aura had already fused with the chains on the stone bridge. The first-generation successor's psychic energy had already become one with the countless flying swords in the air. Anyone who stepped into this area would trigger the first-generation successor's psychic energy and suffer a lightning-fast attack. Bagushadu was skilled in the art of the dark heaven and could fool the heavens, but he could not fool the first-generation successor's mind. The third-generation successor and the first-generation successor shared the same origin and cultivated the same origin immortal art, but the first-generation successor had still sensed them and thrown them into the abyss. Chapter 1545. The first-generation origin immortal sword formation had attacked all the martial artists who had entered the area, but it had not attacked the two long chains. The mottled sword marks on the chains were merely the result of the intruder's unintentional damage. Bagushadu had never imagined that Wang Cheng would target these two chains, but this truly was a flaw right in front of their eyes. Even though he was an enemy, Bagushadu had to admit that Wang Cheng truly did have an outstanding and astonishing ability to use psychic energy to imitate the energy of other people, stones, chains, and other inanimate objects. Required more than just powerful psychic energy. Wang Cheng had been able to do this because his psychic energy had already reached an unimaginable level of materialization. Based on Bagushadu's knowledge, no one in the world could do this. But no matter what Bagushadu thought, Wang Cheng was already advancing along the thick chains like a sloth. Even though Wang Cheng had succeeded in disguising his aura as a chain, allowing him to dodge the first round of attacks from the origin immortal sword formation and the first generation's edge, Wang Cheng was still very cautious, not daring to be careless. Based on the unique characteristics of the origin immortal sword formation, there are 53 blind spots along the chains, places where the origin immortal sword formation can't attack. As long as I follow these 53 blind spots, the attacks will be kept to a minimum. The threat won't be too great. If I jump forward, I'll be able to avoid the vast majority of the dangers. But between blind spots, as I jump, I'll still be attacked by flying swords. This is the most dangerous moment. Wang Cheng lowered his body and looked ahead, his mind in turmoil. His movements just now had been as smooth as flowing water. In the eyes of others, it had been as easy as breathing, but to Wang Cheng, this was far from the case. The flying sword in the air followed him like a shadow and did not disperse, and the chain beneath him was also constantly shaking back and forth. Wang Cheng felt like a small boat in the middle of a raging sea, ready to capsize at any moment. The slightest mistake would result in his death. Just 30% of his strength wasn't enough for him to deal with everything around him. More importantly, Wang Cheng was well aware that this situation wouldn't last for long. The first-generation successor's remnant consciousness was much more complete than the others, and he was only confused and unable to recognize himself. But as time passed, his consciousness would awaken more and more, and eventually, he would be able to distinguish himself from the chains and kill himself. I have at most the time it takes for an incense stick to burn before the first generation's consciousness can see through my disguise. So before that, I have to think of a way to get there as soon as possible. Wang Cheng quietly said to himself. Ding, 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 ding. The sound of flying swords trembling echoed through the air for a long time. Although many of the flying swords couldn't lock onto Wang Chong, they seemed to sense Wang Chong's approximate position, and so they constantly vibrated near Wang Chong. This was the result of having a broken consciousness. After all, the first-generation successor had been dead for 1,000 years, and his consciousness was incomplete. Wang Chong had disguised himself as a metal chain. This was something he had never expected. In the past hundreds and thousands of years, there had never been a martial artist who had done this. Whoosh! Without any hesitation, Wang Chong's body shot forward like a monkey. In a flash, he crossed several dozen feet, and immediately arrived at the third blind spot on the metal chain. Clang! 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 Just as Wang Chong shot forward, a series of metallic clangs rang out from behind him. Countless flying swords struck the metal chain by a hair's breadth, causing countless sparks to fly. Wang Chong's earlier calculations had proved effective. Countless flying swords, suffused with golden light, floated in the air like dark clouds, creating a stunning sight. But the number of flying swords that actually fell to attack Wang Chong was incredibly small. This was on a completely different level from the attacks the third-generation successor had faced. Bagushido had long since been rendered speechless by this sight. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Clang clang clang. Countless flying swords fell, but Wang Chong dodged them one by one. Wang Chong was like a leopard cat as he flew through the air. As he watched Wang Chong rapidly advance, Bagushido slowly began to frown, as if he had encountered some problem that he couldn't understand. Strange, Bagushido muttered to himself as he subconsciously raised his head. Up ahead, mist surged. The mist here was thick and didn't scatter, reaching an astonishing level. Nothing could be seen, but Bagushido's eyes were fixed in that direction, as if he was waiting for something. He had tried before, and if the final barrier were so simple that all he needed to do was deal with the first-generation successor, he would have already started. No matter how terrifying the first-generation successor was, he would have done everything in his power to reach the other side. But this was not the case. 200 years ago, these flying swords had not been the only thing that had stopped a Shinishidu. 200 years ago, it was not just the first-generation successor that had stopped him and made him apprehensive. But for some reason, Wang Chong seemed to be completely unaffected by that thing as he climbed the chains. Buzz! While he was pondering this question, the fog on the other side suddenly rippled, and then a flash of light accompanied by an energy that Bagushido was familiar with. It's begun! Bagushido's heart thumped, and he immediately turned to Wang Chong. His expression was solemn, and he was much more focused than he had been in the past. The danger has only just begun. Whoosh! The chains began to sway, but this time, there was a subtle difference. At the same time, the highly nervous Wang Chong began to sense that something was amiss. Buzz! Without any warning, a burst of energy pierced through the fog and locked onto Wang Chong. Wang Chong's body sank, as if a 1,000-gene cauldron was pressing down on him, and he paled. What's going on here? Wang Chong came to a sudden stop and raised his head to the sky. Almost subconsciously, Wang Chong believed that this was the work of the first-generation successor and the origin immortal sword formation. But a moment later, Wang Chong sensed that something was wrong. This energy was completely different from that of the first-generation successor and his flying swords. Moreover, Wang Chong's ability to disguise himself as a chain had no effect on this energy. Moreover, this was only the beginning. Even though Wang Chong had stopped, the energy did not stop. However, that aura was far from stopping. In just an instant, that aura increased exponentially at a shocking speed. At the start, Wang Chong only felt his shoulders sink, as if a 1,000-gene cauldron was pressing down on him. But a few moments later, this 1,000-gene cauldron turned into steel, and then into a mountain, and it was still growing heavier and heavier at a terrifying rate. This energy was acting on every cell in Wang Chong's body, pressing down on him. Swoosh! There was a massive boom, as the swaying chains were suddenly pulled straight down, forming a massive V in the air. All the pressure was concentrated on Wang Chong's body, causing Wang Chong's body to creak, the veins on his arms bulging, and the stellar energy in his body rumbling. and this energy continued to multiply. In the blink of an eye, Wang Chong's face had turned red. Clang clang clang. Before Wang Chong could react, the sword chi above his head buzzed. This sudden pressure caused Wang Chong's perfect psychic energy disguise to waver, revealing a flaw. Meanwhile, those thousands of swords, broken swords that had lost their targets immediately began to howl toward Wang Chong like sharks that had smelled blood. Chonga! Cries of alarm came from the distance, the voices of the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang. Two figures appeared at the end of the stone bridge and began to advance. Retreat! At this moment, Bagushida's voice came from up ahead, chilling to the bone. No one is allowed to interfere. If any of you dare to interfere, I won't even need your help. I'll kill him on the spot. Bagushida's eyes were sharp and his expression callous. There was no trace of his previous elegant demeanor. The last part was extremely important to him, and he needed to learn as much as he could from Wang Chong. No one was allowed to interfere during this process. The footsteps behind him suddenly stopped, and in front of him, Wang Chong's situation had reached an extremely dangerous level. The Origin Immortal Sword. According to the information that Bagushidu and the Earth Sect had gathered, the divine sword stabbed in front of the first-generation successor was the treasure that the Origin Immortal Lord had left in his cave. This treasure was the most valuable thing in this cave, and to a certain extent, it was even more valuable than the Origin Immortal Art. Besides the Origin Immortal Art, this was also the treasure that Bagushidu had to obtain. As long as he obtained this treasure, he could take it back to the Earth Sect and use it as the treasure of the sect, passing it down to the next generation. But he would not tell Wang Chong any of this. The Origin Immortal Sword was extremely powerful, and it probably contained the most important martial experience of the Origin Immortal Lord's life. It was definitely not one bit inferior to the Earthblood Cauldron, but obtaining it would not be easy. Anyone who approached in hopes of obtaining the Origin Immortal Sword would have to endure a dreadful pressure. Although Wang Chong's psychic concealment art could fool the already dead and half-conscious generation, it was not enough to deal with the Origin Immortal Sword that guarded the rear. Life and death will be decided now, Bagushidu said to himself as he gazed at the taut chains. At this moment, Wang Chong was like an object weighing several thousand tons hanging from a chain. His energy was already leaking out, and the thousands of flying swords were surging toward him. Chapter 1546. Bagushidu took in a deep breath and began to circulate his stellar energy. This was a sign that he was ready to strike. Once Wang Chong failed, he would have to do it himself. But no matter what, he had already made a deal with Osmish Kagan. What a pity, Bagushidu said to himself as he gazed at Wang Chong. Bagushidu's words were correct. Wang Chong was in an extremely perilous situation. Golden light flashed as swords, broken swords and mangled swords rained down from the sky. Boom! Wang Chong gathered all the strength in his body and leaped into the air. In the next moment, he heard the sound of a collision. It was an ear-piercing sound. Tens of thousands of flying swords struck the chain behind Wang Chong, creating a shower of sparks. The chain, which was made of millennium cold iron and covered with ancient talismans, was directly split open. There were countless gaps on it, and some of them were even several inches deep. It was a ghastly sight to behold. Although Wang Chong had managed to escape this disaster, his body was drenched in cold sweat. The small amount of stellar energy in his body immediately began to dwindle. With no time to hesitate, Wang Chong hurriedly calmed his mind and repaired the gap, once more disguising himself as the giant chain. But even though he had escaped this disaster, an even greater danger was approaching. Wang Chong's body was still getting heavier, and the invisible pressure on his body had increased by 2 to 3 times, and it was still showing no signs of stopping. Not only that, Wang Chong's psychic energy was being consumed at an astonishing rate. Every moment was like a high-level battle of psychic energy. In the thick fog, the flying swords were constantly vibrating and buzzing as they circled around. Although he had lost track of Wang Chong's energy, the first-generation successor had already grasped the rough range of Wang Chong's location. With just a little more information, he would be able to locate him and kill him in one fell swoop. However, at this moment, Wang Chong could no longer care about that. For Wang Chong, a greater crisis was approaching. Buzz! The air trembled. And in the blink of an eye, Wang Chong felt an immense pressure bearing down on him. Even with Wang Chong's ability to materialize his mind, he couldn't help but feel insignificant at this moment. It was like an ordinary person without the strength to even truss a chicken, facing those peerless experts who could shatter mountains with just a wave of their hands. Impossible. In an instant, Wang Chong's expression abruptly changed. It was also at this moment that Wang Chong's vision spun. In just an instant, layers of fog appeared before his eyes, and Wang Chong saw the divine sword stuck in the altar. It was different from the flying swords that Wang Chong had seen before. This divine sword was majestic, solemn, and sacred. In Wang Chong's eyes, it was as majestic as a mountain. It's that sword. Wang Chong's heart trembled slightly, and he immediately understood. Buzz! At the same time that Wang Chong saw that sword, there was a flash of light, and the sword suddenly changed, becoming incomparably sharp. Immediately after boom, there was an earth-shattering sound, and the mountain-like sword suddenly chopped down toward Wang Chong. Pooh! The sword chi passed through his body, and in that instant, Wang Chong's whole body trembled, and he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Wang Chong's spiritual energy had already reached a substantial state, and there were few who could match it in the world. And with just one sword, Wang Chong immediately seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. In just an instant, Wang Chong's face suddenly became pale, and his clothes were all wet, as if he had been fished out of water. Not only that, golden light burst out in the sky, and countless flying swords shot down like a waterfall. Wang Chong jumped, and this jump looked extremely weak, completely not as smooth as before. Clang, clang, clang. Countless flying swords brushed past the chains, and even though Wang Chong had already used all his strength, he was still hit in the right leg by the flying swords. Pu, blood splattered. How could this be? Wang Chong suddenly raised his head, his eyes full of shock. This sword had not only severed a third of his psychic energy, it had also severed half of his cultivation. This single sword had made Wang Chong's situation even worse, and he was now in an extremely dangerous situation. But that sword, Wang Chong looked across from him, but he could see nothing but the roiling fog, only a chill. But Wang Chong could clearly sense that the divine sword Bagushidu spoke of was standing on the altar at the end of the chains. From start to finish, that divine sword had not moved. But this sword gave Wang Chong a feeling that it was even more terrifying than the flying swords above his head. The flying swords could attack the body, but this sword was aimed at the soul, obliterating the soul. At this moment, Wang Chong suddenly understood why Bagushidu had feared this divine sword, and why the state teacher of the Turks, Ishinishidu, had resisted the dragon beasts, the nightmare beasts, the traps, and the attacks of the sixth-generation walking corpses, had died to this divine sword in the end. It was impossible to dodge an attack on the mind and soul. Buzz! As this thought flashed through his mind, Wang Chong's vision darkened, and his soul was once more swept into that world of consciousness. In the dusky world, Wang Chong could see nothing but the roiling fog on both sides of him, and that divine sword once more towered over him like a towering mountain, ready to slash down at him at any moment. Wang Chong's heart tightened, and his face paled. But at this moment, the space around him began to twist and churn. Two words appeared in front of Wang Chong's eyes. Fog. Desire obstruction. Wang Chong froze at the sight of these words, a look of confusion on his face, and then he seemed to think of something, a pensive look appearing in his eyes. It's useless. On the distant stone bridge, Bagushida's robe flapped in the wind. He could clearly see the change in Wang Chong, and he knew that he was thinking of a countermeasure. But Bagushidu only shook his head, looking at Wang Chong like he was a dead man. The Origin Immortal Sword follows one strike after another. Once it starts, it can't end. The only way is if you retreat from the chains from the very beginning. Not even someone of Ishinishida's talent was able to stop it, let alone someone else. King of foreign lands, you are also a rare genius of the Tang dynasty. Alas, you will still die here. This trial is truly difficult to pass. But Wuxia mentally sighed. It wasn't that he felt pity for Wang Chong, as he would die sooner or later. Rather, he felt pity that he could no longer get any more information from the Tang dynasty's king of foreign lands. In Wang Chong's current state, his death was almost assured. In the distance, Wang Chong was in a perilous situation. But Wuxia's judgment was correct. In the world of his consciousness, the divine sword began to hum once more, a sign that it was about to strike again. Bang! In the blink of an eye, another sword cleaved through the heavens and slashed down at Wang Chong. This sword caused the world to fall silent, and its power was even greater than before. Rumble! This sword was unavoidable, and in a flash, Wang Chong felt an extreme sense of danger. With no time to think, Wang Chong could only collapse and compress all his psychic energy to the limit in an attempt to block this attack. But as the light passed, a cold energy pressed down on his body. This sword was aimed at every inch of Wang Chong's skin, every cell. As Wang Chong retracted his body to prepare for this lightning-fast strike, the sword chi brushed past him like a light breeze. The situation where his stellar energy and psychic energy were halved did not happen. For a moment, Wang Chong was struck dumb. What's going on here? This sword looked even more terrifying than the previous one. But its lethality was not even 1/10 of the previous one. When Wang Chong's psychic energy swept through his body, he immediately found that his judgment was correct. The stellar energy and psychic energy in his body had decreased to a certain extent, but the decrease was minuscule and completely within the range of what he could bear. For a moment, Wang Chong was confused. It was the same attack from the divine sword, but the first strike had made him feel like he had almost died. But this one felt like a light breeze, and it didn't hurt at all. The same attack produced a completely different effect. Buzz! Just as Wang Chong was feeling bewildered, the fog in the world of his consciousness surged. Wang Chong once again entered that world, and he saw the sword that pierced through the sky. Greed! The clouds in the sky changed, and these two large words appeared. Wang Chong hung on the thick chains, stunned and motionless. In that instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Desire barrier, greed. Wang Chong muttered to himself. As long as one was human, they would have desires, and it was impossible to avoid them. Wang Chong had desires, so he had been heavily injured by the first strike. But greed, was he greedy? Of course he was greedy. He wanted too many things. And when he, as a youth, used Wuxia steel to amass millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of taels of gold, Wang Chong had truly been happy. In order to obtain even more profit, he had signed an agreement with the Cindy High Priest. But at the same time, he was not greedy. He could use the vast wealth he had amassed from Wuxia steel to scatter it all in a single moment, without the slightest regret. And all of this was for the sake of winning the war in the Southwest, and protecting the nearly 1 million innocent civilians of the Southwest. He hoped that he could make a name for himself, and obtain even greater fame and achievements. Thus, after the Southwest, he went to the Northwest and expanded the territory of the Tang dynasty, all the way to Khorasan, which was bordered by the sea. He was still not satisfied with his achievements, and he hoped to fight his way to Baghdad. Finally, he hoped to rule the entire Arabian Empire. But he had not done all this for himself. He could hand over Khorasan to the imperial court without hesitation, and once the West was pacified, he could hand over all military authority to the imperial court. He did not even care about being stripped of his title of king of foreign lands, or the young marquis. All he cared about was the future of this world. As for everything else, he only cared about the means to achieve all this. Chapter 1547. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's brow furrowed as he fell into deep thought. He felt like he had grasped the rhythm and pulse of this divine sword. Upon understanding this, Wang Chong was invigorated. With no time to think, Wang Chong leaped forward like a leopard, light and fast. Clang clang clang. Countless flying swords clashed against the chains, but Wang Chong dodged them in a breathtaking manner. Wonderful! The attacks of the divine swords can affect the first-generation origin immortal sword formation. As he flew, Wang Chong could clearly sense that when he successfully dodged the attacks of the divine swords, the attacks of the thousands of flying swords in the air had weakened. If he didn't have to consider the first-generation Origin Immortal Swords attacks, even if his strength had been greatly reduced, he would still be more than enough to climb a single chain. How could this be? Bagushadu was just about to step forward when he saw this sight, and his entire body trembled in shock. Everything before him had completely surpassed his understanding. Wang Chong's current strength was not even comparable to a profound martial realm martial artist, much less an expert like Bagushadu. But not even Ishinishadu had been able to move as swiftly as Wang Chong. Impossible. This can't be. Bagushadu's eyes went wide. Nothing he knew could explain what was happening before him. Buzz! Almost subconsciously, Bagushadu stepped forward toward the massive chains in front of the stone bridge. Could it be that Ishinishadu's memories are all fake? Or did something happen in this final trial that I don't know about? Bagushadu's eyes flickered with shock and doubt. For a moment, he even felt like he and Wang Chong weren't in the same place, were stepping on the same chain. Buzz! Bagushadu's right foot finally stepped on one of the chains. But the moment he touched it, sword chi buzzed, and all the flying swords in the air shot toward Bagushadu like a swarm of locusts. This grandiose aura was even more terrifying than when he had stepped on the chain. Bagushadu grimaced, and his right foot that had just stepped on the chain drew back, his face ashen. Just how did this kid do it? Bagushadu looked at Wang Chong, feeling a deep unease and jealousy. Putting aside Bagushadu, the Origin Immortal Sword once more slashed down at Wang Chong, while Wang Chong was still making his way up the chain. This was the Sword of Pride. It was aimed at those prideful people. But though Wang Chong had been born into a wealthy family, he was not a prideful person. Wang Chong succeeded in blocking the third strike. 100 feet, 15 feet, 17 feet. Wang Chong used the weakening of the Origin Immortal formation with astonishing speed to advance on the chain. The fourth strike was lust and the fifth was jealousy, but Wang Chong still managed to block both. As he swung the sword, Wang Chong's thoughts became clearer and clearer. I didn't think that there would be such a sword in the world. It doesn't strike at the body, nor does it sever one's origin energy, but it strikes at the deepest depths of one's heart, attacking their most sinful desires. Ishinishadu was a genius of the Turks, a peerless expert of his time. But he couldn't get past the first barrier of desire. He met the sixth-generation successor on the border of the Tang dynasty, and the sixth generation's youth, the world's #1 origin immortal art, and his endless techniques made Ishinishadu jealous. So he committed the sin of jealousy. Moreover, he wanted to seize the secrets of the Origin Immortal Palace by force, so he committed the sin of greed. Even with Ishinishadu's extraordinary abilities, he would still be heavily injured by these 3 strikes. As for Bagushadu, he obtained Ishinishadu's Earthblood Cauldron and inherited all his memories, as well as all his greed, anger, and obsession. In some aspects, these desires are even stronger than Ishinishadu's. Thus, Bagushadu isn't as aloof as he makes himself out to be. It's not that he doesn't want to, but that he doesn't dare. As these thoughts flew through Wang Chong's mind, his mind became as clear as a mirror. Buzz! The winds howled and the fog churned. After the 5th strike, the 6th quickly followed. Rumble! The world seemed to crumble, and in Wang Chong's eyes, the entire world seemed to be tearing apart. This 6th strike was completely different from the previous ones. Before the sword had even slashed down, a blazing red flame had wrapped around it. Wang Chong grimaced at the sight of this flame, and his feet came to a sudden stop. Wang Chong sensed a familiar emotion from this sword. Anger. This sword was aimed at the anger in the depths of one's heart. Damn it! Wang Chong's heart tightened, and he instantly lost his composure. He was not arrogant, jealous, greedy, or lustful, but his anger. In both his last life and this life, Wang Chong had never been able to control it. And his anger was far more intense than the average person's. Without this anger, he would not have been able to stand here and have a chance to start over. This is troublesome. Rumble. Just when everyone believed that Wang Chong would be able to survive this tribulation and reach the other side, Wang Chong suddenly trembled, blood gushing out of his skin, and his body began to weaken. Whoosh! The chains shuddered, and Wang Chong's body swayed as he almost fell off the chains. But even though Wang Chong had clenched his fists and successfully avoided this calamity, his body was still shuddering along with the chains. The situation seemed extremely dangerous, and he was in danger of falling at any moment. How could this be? What's going on? On the stone bridge, Bagushida's expression tensed up. Up until now, Wang Chong had been the person with the highest chance of crossing the chains. If not even he could safely cross, the others would find it even more difficult. But at this moment, the danger Wang Chong was facing was far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. After the sixth sword, the Origin Immortal Formation's seventh sword followed. If the sixth sword had only taken half of Wang Chong's life, the seventh was enough to make Wang Chong's blood freeze and plunge him into a bottomless abyss. The crime of slaughter. Before the seventh sword had even been unleashed, Wang Chong already knew the name of this sword. The most evil in the world was slaughter, which was why there were such things as the demonic path and the evil path. This seventh strike was the strongest strike, and it was also the deadliest strike. Even the time it took to brew this strike was longer than any of the previous strikes. Wang Chong was the great general, the king of foreign lands, and in his last life, the grand marshal who had commanded the world's armies. He had spent half his life on the battlefield, killing countless people. In the War of the Southwest alone, he had killed more than 400,000 Mengshi Zhao and Uzan armies. And in the Battle of Talas and Battle of Khorasan, he had killed more than 1 million Arab soldiers. At the age of 18, he had killed more than 1.5 million soldiers. In terms of the weight of slaughter, no one could surpass Wang Chong. If Ishinishidu had been killed out of jealousy 200 years ago, then Wang Chong had probably killed too many people and died on the spot. Buzz! The seventh sword was still descending, but its energy was still rising, far surpassing the sum of the previous 6, and it showed no signs of stopping. Even worse was that this sword had already locked onto Wang Chong. In this situation, Wang Chong would find it extremely difficult to even move. In the sky, the swords buzzed as if sensing what was about to happen. The thousands of flying swords, broken swords, and broken swords of the first-generation Origin Immortal Sword Formation gathered above Wang Chong like a dark cloud, far more numerous than ever before. The pressure on Wang Chong instantly multiplied. Chong'er! Behind him, at the end of the stone bridge, deep in the fog, Chief Wuxiang and the evil emperor had uneasy looks on their faces. At this moment, there was nothing they could do. If they stepped on the chains, they would only increase the pressure on Wang Chong. Not only would they be of no help, they would only drag down Wang Chong. Moreover, 80% of the origin energy here was under the first-generation successor's control, and outsiders could not interfere with the Origin Immortal Sword Formation. In a flash, Wang Chong was in grave danger. Rivers of blood, millions of corpses. Wang Chong was a natural-born commander, a commander who had lived 2 lives and had killed countless people. If this sword fell, there was no way he could survive. Buzz! The sword blazed with light, even exuding crimson light. In the face of this sword aimed at his soul, every cell in Wang Chong's body, every strand of his soul, was under unimaginable pressure. A moment later, the sky darkened as the sword rose from the ground. It was finally the final moment. Something's wrong. At this moment, Wang Chong's face was pale, his psychic energy and stellar energy rapidly consumed. In the face of death, Wang Chong was bursting with all his potential. Almost instinctively, Wang Chong sensed that something was wrong. The Origin Immortal Lord couldn't have set up such a suicidal trap. If that was the case, why didn't he cut down the chains, so that no one could get through? Moreover, no one is perfect. Given the characteristics of this divine sword, not only can no one in the Origin Immortal sect inherit it, no one can even get close to it. Not even the Origin Immortal Lord has the right to use this immortal sword. This couldn't have been the Origin Immortal Lord's intention. A bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Cold sweat beaded on Wang Chong's forehead, but his mind was working faster than ever. At this moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Everyone has their flaws: desire, greed, jealousy, arrogance, anger, and slaughter. These were practically everyone's weaknesses. No one can escape this, not even the forgers. The more critical the moment, the calmer Wang Chong became. Chapter 1548. As this final thought flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's mind rumbled like a bolt of lightning. At this moment, Wang Chong knew that he had made a fatal error in his understanding of the sword. The core purpose of the sword, or rather, the meaning of its existence, was not to judge evil. But if this was not the case, then what was it? Time ticked by, and Wang Chong did not have much time left. At this moment, Wang Chong was like a man teetering on the edge of the abyss, struggling for that last sliver of life. Desire is the root of human evil. Obsession, resentment, and hatred are all desire, born from desire. The opposite of desire is not desire, and not desire is righteousness. Righteousness, and light are the source of all good. As this thought flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's body trembled in understanding. He felt as if he had grasped the core of this series of events. If killing is a sin, then the opposite of killing is not killing. Not killing is benevolence. Buzz. Like a bolt of lightning, Wang Chong's body trembled and his eyes went wide. At that moment, he seemed to understand something. Benevolence and righteousness, yes. The origin immortal Lord was not some evil cultivator, nor was he someone who abhorred evil. The spring and autumn Tao did not advocate punishing evil, but promoting good. Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, but in the end, his eyes were bright and his mind clear. The opposite of arrogance is rudeness. The opposite of jealousy is wisdom. Only wisdom can restrain jealousy. The opposite of anger is gentleness and humility. The opposite of lust is righteousness. Only by keeping the righteousness in mind can one avoid lust. This divine sword did not advocate using violence to curb violence, nor was it punishing evil, but promoting good. Its core was not killing, but benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness, gentleness, respect, and humility. As this final thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, his eyes began to crackle with lightning. He suddenly understood what sword it was. This was not a sword of punishment, but a true sword of kings. In front of this king's sword, there was no place for lust or desire. Ishinishidu had misjudged this sword, only seeing it as a rare and powerful sword, which was why he had died here. But Gushido also didn't know what sword this was, so if he dared to attack he would still die. No gold is perfect, and no one is perfect. Everyone has their own weaknesses. The most important thing was to let this sword feel the righteousness in his heart. That was the most important thing. The origin immortal Lord had not left this sword behind to protect it in the sunless depths of the earth. His goal was to use this sword to select truly virtuous and righteous people. That was why he left the 2 chains behind instead of cutting them off. He was choosing a master for this sword. Rumble. Thunder boomed, the sun and moon rose. And as Wang Chong's mind surged, the world underwent a massive transformation. Rumble. There was a heaven-shaking boom, as that mountainous pressure on Wang Chong's body suddenly vanished. Wang Chong raised his head, and saw for the first time that the golden sword was covered in words. From top to bottom, each stroke was dignified and upright. They were benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness, gentleness, respect, and humility. These 10 large words, like iron hooks and silver strokes, went straight into the heart. Buzz. In the world of his mind, Wang Chong suddenly stood up. His eyes shone with a dazzling light. At this moment, he suddenly knew what he had to do. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong completely opened up his heart and released all his ambitions. The sun and moon shone brightly, the world majestic. He had gone through the tribulation of death and reincarnated 9 times for no other reason than that the world, the mountains, the rivers, and the common people would not be destroyed. He hoped that the civilization of the Central Plains would continue for 10,000 years. This heart, this thought, all was clear. All that he desired, all that he could hide. Wang Chong slowly closed his eyes and opened up his mind. The various scenes from his last life, the crumbling of mountains and rivers, the burning of fire, the corpses of the common people. All these scenes of azura and bloodshed surged out of his mind and into the divine sword. Lives were like ants, mountains and rivers as weighty as heaven and earth. If the divine sword had a spirit, please lend me a hand. Buzz! A moment later, the thousands of golden flying swords that had been flying toward Wang Chong suddenly froze in the air. Not only that, clang! The metal lock that had been bent all this time, and even trembled in the fierce wind, seemed to have received a strange power, suddenly and fiercely pulling straight, becoming incomparably straight. Not only that, in the depths of the mist, where there were no fierce winds or waves, golden light erupted. The thick mist parted, and the origin immortal sword that had been hidden at the end of the chain this entire time suddenly appeared before everyone's eyes, exuding a vast and majestic aura. Bagushidu grimaced at this sight, a very ill foreboding in his heart. Whoosh! While Bagushidu was still reeling in shock, the seemingly dying Wang Chong suddenly became full of life and vigor, and shot forward like a bolt of lightning, reaching the end of the chain. Wang Chong, stop! Bagushida's roar resounded through the world. The final barrier left behind by the origin immortal lord was so dangerous that not even Bagushida knew that he would be able to overcome it. Thus, he had chosen a scapegoat like Wang Chong. Although he had said that he hoped that Wang Chong would take the divine sword for him, deep down, Bagushida didn't believe him. But at this moment, the distant Wang Chong seemed to have heard nothing. His body was like a leopard, shooting forward like a bolt of lightning. He was already very close to the end of the chain. Stop! Bagushidu once more shouted from the end of the stone bridge, his voice tinged with impatience and rage. But at this moment, Wang Chong had no time to worry. Life and death will depend on this. Wang Chong raised his head and looked forward, his eyes bright as snow. Bagushidu would never let him go. Wang Chong had understood this from the very start. Whether it was to complete his deal with Osmish Khagan, eliminate the scourge of the Western Turks, or seize the divine sword, Bagushidu would never let him go. If he charged forward, he might still have a chance. But if he listened to Bagushidu, he would be firmly in his grasp. Like a drowning man, he would sink into the bottomless abyss without the slightest hope. More importantly, when he had obtained the divine sword's approval, Wang Chong had felt an indescribable strange sensation, as if he had formed some sort of connection with the divine sword. Not only that, Wang Chong had used up a great deal of his energy, but at that moment, Wang Chong suddenly felt strands of spiritual energy that had belonged to the origin immortal sword formation surge into his body. Wang Chong's dried-up dantian was like rain after a long drought, recovering at an astonishing speed. Even Wang Chong's expended psychic energy was recovering at an incredible rate. What shocked Wang Chong the most was the divine sword's suppression of Bagushida's energy. The black stellar energy that Bagushidu had sent into Wang Chong's body was dark and cold, and brimming with the savagery of a Turkic wolf of the steppe. This negative energy was precisely what the king's sword naturally countered. Wang Chong sensed that the closer he got to the sword, the more the black stellar energy that Bagushidu had used to suppress him was suppressed. Wang Chong immediately understood that if he wanted to escape Bagushidu, the sword at the end of the chain was his only and final chance. The final link. Wang Chong raised his head and looked across. All the flying swords in the sky had stopped the moment he had obtained the sword's approval, completely ignoring Wang Chong. Such a situation had never happened before in the history of the origin immortal sect. At this moment, Wang Chong finally saw the divine sword right in front of him. Whoosh! Wang Chong's body shot through the air like a flood dragon, leaping off the chains and landing on the fog-shrouded altar. In front of the altar stood the tall and mighty figure of the first-generation successor like a god. But even more dazzling than the first-generation successor was the origin immortal divine sword thrust into the ground in front of him. In a flash of light, Wang Chong extended his hands and grabbed the hilt of the origin immortal divine sword. In the rear, Bagushida's expression turned extremely nasty. Bagushidu had comforted himself by thinking that Wang Chong was under immense pressure and might not have hurt him. But when Wang Chong stepped onto the altar and gripped the sword with both hands, his last bit of hope vanished. But when Wang Chong stepped onto the altar and gripped his sword with both hands, the last sliver of hope in his heart vanished. Without a doubt, Wang Chong had betrayed him. This fellow was completely out of his control. Foolish king of foreign lands. You are seeking your own death. Bagushida's pupils constricted, his eyes turning as frigid as the harsh winter. So what if he was unparalleled in intelligence and resourcefulness? Did he really think that he could escape from his grasp just because he had broken through this chasm? How ignorant. Kacha. A moment later, Bagushida clenched his fist and cracked, the sound of his joints contracting resounding through the abyss. Bagushidu immediately used the supreme forbidden art of the earth sect of the Juang Holy Mountain, the Dark Moon's flame. The moment Wang Chong gripped the origin immortal sword. Boom! In an instant, the black restriction spell buried deep inside Wang Chong's body was like a wildfire. It rose up and burned fiercely. Open! Chapter 1549. Rumble. As Wang Chong pulled on the origin immortal sword, the entire underground world rumbled and quaked. Clatter. High above the heads of the powerful martial artists, the ceiling clattered as large chunks of stone, dust, and metal, or began to fall from above. Bang! One of the massive rocks struck one of the chains, causing the entire chain to fiercely sway. At this moment, the entire underground world seemed like it was on the verge of collapse. What's going on? What happened? How could there be such a massive quaking? What's going on? At the same time, in another underground cave, several experts from the Xiedao sect also raised their heads, their expressions shocked and unmoving. The shockwave was too powerful. It felt as if the entire underground world was collapsing and was about to bury the group of people underground. This was not something that any martial artist could do in a battle. Haha, the origin immortal art. It must be the origin immortal art. Someone must have found the world's #1 art. Let's go. In the third area of the origin immortal cave, one of the sect experts seemed to understand something, and his eyes lit up. Before his companions could react, he shot toward the source of the tremors with incredible speed. Buzz! At the same time, in the underground palace, the earth trembled, and a large amount of dust fell from above. With a boom, a thick metal pillar of the underground palace directly fell and smashed onto the ground, causing a cloud of dust to rise into the air. In a flash, the Righteous Alliance forces all stopped. Alliance Lord? They all turned to the leader of the Jingqi League, Song Yuanyi. Song Yuanyi said nothing, but raised his head toward the source of the quaking. For the first time, this titan of the righteous path who would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed slightly frowned. Looks like someone has already arrived there. A familiar voice reached their ears. Vice Alliance Master Xie Guangting had his sleeves fluttering. He walked up from the back and stood next to Song Yuanyi. Both of them looked in the same direction. The underground palace is guarded by a disciple of the 6th generation origin immortal lord, and the journey is fraught with difficulties. I wonder who could be so fast. Xie Guangting's brows were tightly furrowed, his expression grave. Experts had been plentiful in this operation to the northwest, and the Jingqi League had almost turned out in full force, but they had still failed to find the origin immortal art. This was undoubtedly a major setback for the Jingqi League. I hope it's not that person. Song Yuanyi suddenly spoke. It was a simple sentence, and he didn't even mention who it was. However, Xie Guangting's expression changed when he heard it. But before he could say anything, Song Yuanyi had already disappeared in front of him. Go. No matter what price I have to pay, I must forcefully break through the origin immortal art. Someone must have found it. Let's go. Rumble. The earth quaked as a panicked roar resounded through the ground. As Song Yuanyi and the Jingqi League charged toward the core, the Black Yin ancestors' Black Dragon roared and led the Bone Devil and the countless 5 Ancestor Alliance disciples toward the source of the quaking. The underground palace was fraught with danger, and many of the 5 Ancestor Alliance's experts had already died. But there was no time to worry about such things. If they could not obtain the supreme and infinite origin immortal art, they would have come for nothing. So many people would have died for nothing. Most importantly, as a famous martial arts giant of the evil path, how could he tolerate this kind of thing where his treasures were snatched right under his nose? Rumble. With a shrill whistle, the group vanished from the passage, hurrying in the direction of Wang Chong's group. At this moment, Anyone who could sense the quaking rushed toward Wang Chong's group like a tide. Wang Chong had no idea about any of this, nor did he know that when he pulled out his sword, he had driven the crowd into a frenzy and drawn all the martial artists underground. Open for me. At this moment, Wang Chong's mind was completely focused on the sword in front of him. When he exerted his strength, the entire world seemed to tremble. At that moment, Wang Chong felt like he was not pulling out a sword, but an enormous world. Bang! After what seemed like both a second and countless eons, Wang Chong exerted force through his hands, the veins on his body bulging. Rumble! Finally, with a heaven-shaking boom, the ground cracked, and the divine sword that had been buried underground for so long was pulled out of the ground in a burst of golden light. The moment Wang Chong pulled out his sword, an enormous wave of energy surged out of the divine sword and into Wang Chong's body. Cackalack! Wang Chong's body began to explode. This majestic, dignified energy, imbued with the righteous path of the world, rushed into Wang Chong's meridians, and then flowed down into Wang Chong's dantian, extinguishing the energy that Bagushidu had hidden in Wang Chong's body. Bagushidu's dark moon blaze was a supreme forbidden art of the Eastern Turks. Not even a peak great general would be able to block it. In the history of the Earth sect, the number of supreme experts who had died to the dark moon blaze was innumerable. But this energy melted like snow in the face of the Origin Immortal Sword's righteous energy that seemed to pierce through the past and present, as dazzling as the sun and moon. Not only that, the moment Wang Chong pulled out his sword, a vast energy surged into every meridian and cell in Wang Chong's body, nourishing the energy that Wang Chong had consumed. This energy was different from any energy that Wang Chong had encountered before. It was extremely dense, similar to the Origin Immortal Stellar Energy, but much denser than any Origin Immortal Stellar Energy that Wang Chong had encountered before. Moreover, ordinary Origin Immortal Stellar Energy was golden, but the energy within this divine sword was violet gold and exuded a divine energy. What shocked Wang Chong the most was, as this energy surged into Wang Chong's body, it completely obliterated the thousands of different kinds of energy that Wang Chong had absorbed through the great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art. One had to realize that for a very long time, Wang Chong had been in constant danger of cultivation defect because of the thousands of conflicting energies in his body. But now, as the energy from the divine sword surged into his body, the problem of mixed energies that had plagued Wang Chong for so long was instantly resolved. At the same time, this also meant that Wang Chong's cultivation defect had been completely cured. Wonderful! Wang Chong was ecstatic to sense the change in his body, and he almost didn't dare to believe his own eyes. Without these problems in his body, his strength had instantly reached its peak, and he was even stronger than he had been in the past. This was Wang Chong in his most perfect state. But this was not the only thing that shocked and delighted Wang Chong. You finally arrived. At this moment, a heavy voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear, tinged with respect and reverence, as well as a deep sense of relief. Bang! The sound of a knee hitting the ground rang out, and as Wang Chong watched in shock, the first-generation successor's majestic and mountainous body suddenly kneeled and lowered his proud head. This corpse that had been dead for almost 1,000 years in Wang Chong's mind was actually submitting to Wang Chong for the first time. Cling cling clang. At almost the same time, the thousands of flying swords in the sky began to shine, their tips lowering as they bowed to Wang Chong. What's going on here? The distant crowd was flabbergasted. In the fog, Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor, and the chief of Wuxia were standing side by side at the edge of the cliff, staring in shock at this strange phenomenon. Impossible! What's going on here? At this moment, no one was more shocked than Bagushidu. He immediately activated the Dark Moon's flame in Wang Chong's body, but this legendary forbidden art of the Earth sect had no effect whatsoever. Bagushidu believed that something had gone wrong and tried 3 more times, but Wang Chong still showed no reaction. It was like this forbidden art had been planted in someone else's body, and this peerless origin immortal sword formation, which had sent the 3rd-generation swordsman of the same origin into the abyss, completely ignored the outsider Wang Chong. Not only that, the swords in the sky, and the first-generation swordsmen on the altar all bowed their heads to Wang Chong. This sort of phenomenon had completely surpassed Bagushida's understanding. Ishinishidu, and that final insurmountable heavenly tribulation, seemed to be nothing in front of Wang Chong. Impossible. This can't be. Even someone as composed as Bagushidu lost his composure in the face of such a major shock. His eyes were icy as he stared at the young figure, his eyes exploding with killing intent. At this moment, Wang Chong's attention was completely focused on the divine sword. Congratulations to user for triggering the world event, Origin Immortal Sword Basic. Rewarding user with 100,000 points of destiny energy. In addition, activating the branch skill Kindred Flame. Kindred Flame. For creatures with broken consciousnesses that are struggling at death's door and on the verge of collapse, user can temporarily grant them the ability to move for a short period of time. This skill requires absorbing the target's broken consciousness, so it can only be used once on each target. Note: as this skill requires fusing with the target's broken consciousness, a certain amount of preparation time is required. Chapter 1550, Chapter 1519, Chapter 1519 Inch My mission is complete. At this moment, the familiar voice sounded in front of Wang Chong once again, and this time, the voice was getting weaker and weaker. Before he could finish speaking, clang 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 clang. In the void behind him, the tens of thousands of golden flying swords instantly lost all of their luster and degenerated into ordinary metal, falling into the abyss. Bang! Almost at the same time, the shoulders of the first generation's mountainous body drooped, and his head drooped. It was as if he had completed his destiny, and he instantly froze in place motionless. As the flying sword fell, the last shred of his aura dissipated. Buzz! Seeing that the first gen's remnant consciousness was about to dissipate, Wang Chong's heart thumped. Without the slightest hesitation, he pressed his palm against the first gen's shoulder. The instant Xiao Chen's palm touched the frost iron, he felt an ice-cold sensation coming from his fingertips. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong instantly activated the branch ability he had obtained before. Activate Xanhua. With a thought from Wang Chong, a tiny purple flame passed through Wang Chong's fingertip and entered the body of the first general. The first gen's body was still like a stone, standing there motionlessly. The torch fire entered the first gen's body, and a faint blood-red color immediately appeared on the surface. In his body, the tiny ball of torch fire flowed through his meridians and into the depths of the first gen's mind. It floated there motionlessly, and the first gen's dissipating consciousness seemed to be pulled by a suction force towards the area where the tiny ball of purple flames was. The activation of Xanhua required time, but to Wang Chong, he had already gotten rid of the hidden injuries in his body and cured his cultivation deviation. Now he had enough strength to protect himself, and at the same time, enough time. The underground world was filled with danger, and to Wang Chong, keeping a first-generation expert was equivalent to keeping a peerless expert. This could also be used in case of emergencies. Buzz! After doing all this, Wang Chong did not hesitate. He quickly stepped over the corpses and walked to the front of the altar. As early as at the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong had seen something placed on the altar, and reality had confirmed his speculation. There were also a few items placed on the altar. They were all red sandalwood colored and had a mottled surface. It looked like a square wooden box that had been around for a long time. The other item was a small golden pill bottle that was 6 to 7 inches tall and looked like a gourd. The small bottle was glossy and exquisite. Because of the Dan Qi, Wang Chong could smell a fragrant aroma even before he got close. Exalted Immortal Pill. Wang Chong glanced at it and recognized the ancient seal script on it. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong reached out and grabbed the small bottle and wooden box on the altar. Wang Chong did not open the bottle containing the Origin Immortal Scroll, but the red sandalwood box. The moment the wooden box was opened, a small booklet immediately came into view. Formation Heavenly Book. Wang Chong rejoiced at the words on the cover. The formation elder had asked him to find the formation heavenly book, which he had finally obtained. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong picked up the formation heavenly book and glanced down. Wang Chong had originally believed that the origin immortal art would be beneath the heavenly book, but when he lifted the lid, Wang Chong was struck dumb. The bottom of the box was empty. Other than the formation heavenly book, there was nothing else in the box. What's going on here? For a moment Wang Chong was dumbfounded. Is the origin immortal art not here? He had always believed that the true origin immortal art was on this altar. And logically speaking, the first-generation successor was guarding the final gate, so the origin immortal art should also be here. Was the situation different from what he had imagined? Perhaps this was not the final gate? At this moment, Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. But before he had time to think, an icy shout came from behind him. King of foreign lands, give me the origin immortal sword and the wooden box. That shout contained boundless killing intent. In an instant, even the entire space seemed to freeze. The temperature plummeted, as if it had fallen into an ice cave. Whoosh! 800 meters away. On the other end, Bagushida's expression was cold as he stepped onto the chains. With a wave of his black sleeve, he shot toward Wang Chong like a bolt of lightning. His eyes were fixed on the origin immortal sword in Wang Chong's hand, and the wooden box. As the flying sword fell, the first-generation successor's energy vanished from the air, and the origin immortal sword collapsed on its own. As for the core of the treasury, the origin immortal sword, and the origin immortal art in the wooden box, he was determined to take them back to the solar holy mountain. Anyone who dared to stop him would die. Buzz! As he flew forward, Bagushida's expression chilled, and a powerful energy pierced through the air to lock onto Wang Chong. Bagushidu, you're delusional. On the other side, Bagushidu had just begun to move, when Wang Chong sensed his aura, and immediately turned his head. For a nobleman, 10 years was not too long, but against Bagushidu, it wouldn't take that long. Whether it was because of the seal Bagushidu had placed on him, his other actions, or his concern for the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong was determined to eliminate Bagushidu, the future state teacher of the Earth sect. Bang! Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong grabbed the origin immortal sword and jumped off the altar. Midway, he lightly tapped on the thick chains and shot toward Bagushidu. Now that his hidden injuries were gone, Wang Chong no longer had any misgivings about dealing with Bagushidu. Rumble! In the air, the winds howled and thunder boomed. Yin and Yang, the sun and moon illusions that represented the great yin-yang heaven creation, art once more appeared in the air. Moreover, they were much more solid than before, like the miniature great yin and miniature sun of the world. The core of the origin immortal treasury had already been condensed with a vast amount of energy, and now, under Wang Chong's control, this energy surged toward Wang Chong's origin immortal sword and slashed at Bagushidu. Great yin-yang art. This attack contained not just Wang Chong's own strength, but also the energy that the great yin-yang art had drawn from the entire abyss. The power of this attack was unimaginable. Heaven-supporting pillar. At the same time, Bagushida's eyes shone with cold light. His right index finger, middle finger, and ring finger formed a hook, and he clawed at Wang Chong, causing the world to sway. Clang clang clang. The 3 earthblood cauldrons appeared around him, and the world rumbled as a passage opened in the depths of space-time. A dark and indescribably pure energy surged out and rumbled toward Wang Chong. Heaven-supporting pillar. This was one of the strongest techniques of the Earth sect of the Eastern Turks. It was a simple technique that returned the complex to the simple, and though it was simple, it was imbued with immense power. Boom! With an earth-shattering sound, 2 majestic forces violently collided with each other in the void. The spiritual energy between heaven and earth boiled and drifted about. The boundless energy radiated in all directions, causing the dense fog that had been lingering in the air all year round to suddenly explode. Clang! There was a metallic clatter as a violet bolt of lightning struck the 3 earthblood cauldrons around Bagushidu. Bzzz. Bagushidu swayed a few times on the thick chains, but he quickly steadied himself like an immovable mountain. Across from him, Wang Chong was pushed back 6 or 7 steps as if struck by a heavy blow, his body staggering and almost falling off the chains. "Haha, king of foreign lands, you're no match for me." Bagushidu roared with laughter as he glanced across at Wang Chong, a smile appearing on his face. "So what if you have the origin immortal sword? You don't have the strength to use the sword's power. Even if you have the sword, you're still no match for me. I advise you to obediently hand over the origin immortal sword and the things on the altar, and I can still consider sparing the lives of the two of you." Bagushidu didn't need to turn his head to know that the chief of Wuxiang and the evil emperor had surrounded him from behind. But Bagushidu was fearless. As the sect master of the Earth sect, he had always possessed outstanding talent, a sturdy foundation, and extraordinary willpower. In this aspect, he was not one bit inferior to a titan of the Central Plains like the evil emperor. Moreover, he had 3 earthblood cauldrons that had retained half of Ishinishida's power. With these ritual tools, he had already reached the legendary dark radiant heaven, subtle, of the Eastern Turks. In this aspect, Wang Chong and the others were still lacking compared to him. "Bagushidu, don't spout nonsense. If you want that sword, you'll have to defeat me first." Wang Chong chuckled, his hands gripping the sword, as if he had no intention of fighting Bagushidu, truly seeking death. A hint of anger finally appeared in Bagushidu's eyes at Wang Chong's words. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Boom! Bagushidu stomped down, his black robe once more flapping in the wind. Without the slightest hesitation, Bagushidu's already powerful energy soared once more. His energy locked onto Wang Chong, ready to launch a new wave of attacks against Wang Chong. Crack! Chapter 1551. Earthblood Cauldron. As this thought flashed through his mind, Bagushidu grimaced, his face turning ghastly pale. His aura fused with the Earthblood Cauldron. In that instant, he sensed that the Earthblood Cauldron that had been passed down for hundreds of years, had actually split open at a speed visible to the naked eye right under his nose. Furthermore, the crack was still expanding. "No, this can't be." Bagushidu's eyes went round in disbelief. These 3 ritual tools of the Earth sect were sturdy and powerful, and even the best of weapons would find it impossible to leave a scratch on them. This was because the Earthblood Cauldron had been forged from materials that the Earth sect of the Solar Holy Mountain had expended the strength of the entire Turkic Khaganate over decades to gather from all over the world. They were already extremely rare materials, and many supreme experts of the Earth sect had also added many secret arts and seals to them. In Bagushidu's understanding, these ritual tools were indestructible, but Bagushidu had never imagined that a single strike from Wang Chong would be able to leave a crack in the Earthblood Cauldron. Although it was only a short crack, Bagushidu's heart felt like it was about to split open. "Ha ha ha, Bagushidu, you're getting happy too early. All you're relying on is the Earthblood Cauldron. Once I destroy your ritual tool, let's see what else you can rely on." At this moment, a voice resounded through the world, shattering the silence. Nearby, Wang Chong also saw the change in Bagushidu's Earthblood Cauldron, and Wang Chong's eyes instantly brightened. The origin immortal sword was actually able to counter Bagushidu's Earthblood Cauldron? This was an unexpected discovery for Wang Chong. Wang Chong had originally been relying on the fact that he had recovered all his energy, gotten rid of all his hidden injuries, and the enormous energy contained in the origin immortal sword, so he was not afraid of fighting to the death with Bagushidu. But this discovery was a massive harvest for Wang Chong. "Bagushidu, let's go again." With a strange look in his eyes, Wang Chong howled. Before Bagushidu could attack, he gathered up all his stellar energy and the surrounding origin energy and shot forward like a bolt of lightning at Bagushidu. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking boom as a white bolt of lightning flashed between the two. This time, Wang Chong remained motionless, but Bagushidu was forced back several steps by the enormous pressure. Caklack. The cracks on Bagushidu's Earthblood Cauldron were originally only as thick as a strand of hair, but after the second blow of the origin immortal sword, they had not only lengthened by 6 to 7 inches, but also widened and became more and more obvious. It seemed like Wang Chang's sword would cleave through it in just a few more blows. Impossible. This is impossible. I can't. Bagushidu was flabbergasted. Just 2 blows from Wang Chang's sword had left him in an indescribable shock. His entire world had collapsed. Wang Chang's sword had not only cleaved apart the Earthblood cauldron of the Earth sect, but it had also cleaved apart the deeply rooted belief in his heart. Even more serious was that these 3 Earthblood cauldrons were his life-bound artifacts, and Bagushida's energy and Yuan's spirit had fused with them. As the Earthblood cauldrons split apart, Bagushida's energy began to leak out, and his powerful strength began to drop. Bagushidu, hand over your life. Now is the time for you to pay the price. At almost the same time, 2 furious storms of energy shot out from the fog and lunged at Bagushidu. Myriad energies returned to the origin. Yang divine art. With 2 furious roars, the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang joined the fray. Up ahead, Wang Chang's eyes were bright as he swung the origin immortal sword at Bagushidu. The space on these 2 chains was narrow and limited movement. Not even Bagushidu would be able to dodge this pincer attack. Bastard! Bagushidu was both shocked and infuriated. At this moment, he no longer had any of his previous grace and composure. So what if you have the origin immortal sword? Even if I have to be heavily injured, I'll still kill you and your disciple. Being forced into desperate straits by Wang Chang's group of 3, had forced Bagushidu to unleash his monstrous killing intent. Sundering earth and collapsing mountains, Bagushida's eyes flashed with cold light as he used one of the strongest techniques of the Earth sect. Rumble! The earth cracked and the mountains collapsed. Under the influence of an invisible force, the entire cave trembled violently, as if it would collapse at any moment. The 3 cauldrons on Bagushida's body also shot forward, transforming into a triangular formation that slowly revolved around Bagushidu. At the same time, Bagushidu poured more stellar energy into the Earthblood cauldrons, causing them to explode with energy as vast as 3 mountains. Boom boom boom. The attacks of the trio continued to strike at Bagushidu, but they were immediately stopped by the powerful fortress formed by the Earthblood cauldrons. Jumping clowns, I'll kill you first, and then I'll kill that brat. Bagushidu was infuriated by this 3-pronged attack. As he used the Earthblood cauldron to block the trio, Bagushida's eyes chilled. Without the slightest hesitation, he turned around and clawed at the Wuxiang village chief and demonic emperor old man behind him. Kree! The air howled as Bagushida's black stellar energy transformed into blood-red pythons, their faces savage and steely as they howled and lunged at the pair. Earthblood pythons. Bagushida's move was another supreme technique of the Earth sect. The Earthblood python formed from stellar energy was as tough as steel and as sharp as a divine weapon. In a chaotic battle between top-class experts, it was extremely effective at piercing through stellar energy and could break through an opponent's stellar energy. Bagushidu had relied on this technique to defeat all his competitors on the Solar Holy Mountain and become the Earth Sect Master. One could easily imagine how powerful he was. Wang Chong was currently at his peak, but the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang were far from the same. Moreover, the 2 of them did not have divine swords, so they were still lacking compared to Bagushidu and his Earthblood cauldrons. As long as Bagushidu could capture these 2, he could use them to threaten Wang Chong. When the time came, the origin immortal sword and the treasures on the altar would naturally fall into his hands. Old village chief, let's use that move together. Behind him, the demonic emperor old man only needed a glance to understand Bagushida's intentions. But as Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor had his own pride. In the face of Bagushida's attack, the evil emperor's expression darkened, and he showed no intention of backing down. That's all we can do. On the other chain, the chief of Wuxiang's white hair fluttered in the wind. With just a few words, he had understood the evil emperor's intentions. During this period of time, the 2 of them traveled together and constantly exchanged what they had learned in martial arts. At the same time they explored higher realms. Although the 2 of them were still unable to break through to the nuance realm, they managed to figure out a combination ultimate technique. This technique had been derived from the subtle realm energy that Kateba had used. It was a secret art that combined the strength of two people to open the subtle realm. The conditions for using this secret art were extremely harsh. Two people had to have an extremely high level of cooperation and reach the half-step subtle realm at the same time. But even so, this technique was still rather immature. Because it was a trick and not one that had truly reached the subtle realm, there was a high chance of failure, and there was also a chance that the user would suffer a backlash. The chief of Wuxia and the evil emperor had originally estimated that they would need another 3 or 4 months to complete this technique, but they had no time to worry about such things. Universe reversal, Grand Void enters the subtle. At almost the same moment, the chief of Wuxia and the evil emperor clasped their left and right palms together, while their free hands shot toward Bugushidu. Bang! The place where the left and right palms of the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxia clasped together began to glow like a blazing sun, exuding dreadful ripples of energy. In the depths of space and time, rumbling sounds could be heard. Under the effect of this invisible power, another space and time suddenly opened up at this moment. The evil emperor and the chief of Wuxia were able to use their combined strength to break through the spatial barrier and open up a path to the subtle realm. At the same time, the vast energy of the minute subtlety realm surged into their bodies at an astonishing speed. How could this be? Bugushidu could sense that the two of them had both entered the subtle realm, and their stellar energy had swelled to a new level. His body trembled in shock, his eyes brimming with disbelief. The martial path was a solitary cultivation, and the stronger one was, the more difficult it was to rely on external objects to break through. Bugushidu had spent several years refining these 3 earthblood cauldrons, and he had paid a heavy price. Moreover, he had relied on external objects to break through the subtle realm, not his own cultivation. Bugushidu was still half a step into the subtle realm, still lacking that final step. For the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxia to work together to break through the barrier and enter the subtle realm without any external objects was simply unimaginable. Rumble! Bugushidu didn't have time to think before their attacks collided with Bugushidu's earth-blood python with a thunderous momentum. Awa! Chapter 1552. Bugushidu, you dare! But before Bugushidu could strike while the iron was hot, a furious roar came from behind him. A thunderous roar that seemed capable of shattering space itself. Wang Chong gripped the origin immortal sword, his eyes turning red and his body exploding with killing intent. Rumble! As Wang Chong swung his sword, Wang Chong's origin immortal sword seemed to respond to Wang Chong's thoughts, and exploded with dazzling light. Not even Wang Chong noticed that a brand new energy imbued with the power of Allah had fused into Wang Chong's stellar energy. Bugushidu paled as he sensed the terrifying rage and killing intent coming from Wang Chong's body, a hint of panic appearing in his eyes. There was no time to think, and Bugushidu was forced to give up on capturing the chief of Wuxia and the evil emperor. Instead, he gathered all the power of the 3 earthblood cauldrons and smashed them at Wang Chong. 3 cauldrons in the air. Bugushidu formed a spell with his right hand, and the 3 cauldrons began to rumble and rumble, the air around them seeming to crumble and collapse. In the next moment, there was an earth-shattering noise. Golden light filled the air, as the 2 destructive forces collided violently like comets. So strong! The moment the 2 energies collided, Bugushidu felt his shoulders sink as if a mountain had smashed into him, and his entire face paled. He could clearly sense that this was a full-strength attack from Wang Chong, but this one was even more powerful and terrifying. Each blow of the origin immortal sword was stronger and more difficult to block. Caklack! Caklack! Bugushidu was both shocked and infuriated. With each blow of Wang Chong's sword, a crack would appear on the earthblood cauldrons, and these cracks would grow larger and longer. What Bugushidu found most unacceptable was that these damages were irreparable. The supreme ritual tool of the Earth sect, which had been passed down through the generations, had remained unscathed for several hundred years, and yet it had suffered such irreparable damage at his own hands. Bugushidu simply could not accept this. Earthblood curse. In his fury and shock, Bugushidu's hatred for Wang Chong seeped into his bones. Without the slightest hesitation, Bagushadu immediately used a powerful forbidden art of the Earth sect that specialized in controlling curses. This technique required the sacrifice of a certain amount of essence blood and primordial spirit to strengthen the 3 earth blood cauldrons. After using this move, one would need to recuperate for at least 3 to 5 months in the future. Furthermore, it would cause irreparable damage to one's spirit and consciousness. The power of the magic tool would also decrease in the next year or so. But Bagushadu had no time to worry about such things. As long as he could eliminate Wang Chong and deal with this powerful foe, it would all be worth it. Moreover, if he didn't stop Wang Chong, the 3 earthblood cauldrons would really be destroyed by his hands. Plush. Bagushadu bit down on the tip of his tongue and sprayed a mouthful of essence blood, mixed with pure stellar energy, onto the 3 earthblood cauldrons. King of foreign lands, this king will have you die. Bagushadu stared at Wang Chong, his fury raging in his heart. But just when he was preparing to use his blood as a sacrifice to communicate with the blood runes on the earthblood cauldron and activate the earthblood curse to kill Wang Chong, Bagushadu's mind was thrown into disarray by something unexpected. Buzz! Without any warning, the energy on the 3 earthblood cauldrons fell into chaos. Bagushadu's blood was unable to seep into the cauldrons. Not only that, Bagushadu had already made the 3 earthblood cauldrons impregnable, and he had relied on the enormous energy contained within them to break into the dark radiant heaven, giving him strength on par with the subtle realm. But at this moment, the power of the 3 cauldrons had gone completely out of control, and the countless earth sect masters had spent so much effort to carve them had lost their effectiveness. Without the help of the 3 earthblood cauldrons, Bagushadu felt like his body was empty. Before he could react, his strength began to recede, dropping from the subtle realm to the half-step subtle realm. How could this be? Bagushadu screamed as he swiftly retreated, his face ghastly pale. He no longer had that disdainful and proud demeanor that seemed to control the entire situation. How could this be? How could the Origin Immortal Sword have this kind of ability? Bagushadu's mind was in turmoil as he stared at the Origin Immortal Sword in Wang Chong's hand like he was looking at a ghost. He had gathered a great deal of information on the Origin Immortal Sword, but he had never heard that this immortal sword could interfere with ritual tools and render them useless. This was beyond Bagushadu's understanding of divine swords. This Origin Immortal Sword was inconceivably powerful, far surpassing the ritual tools of the Earth sect. Bagushadu's face was ghastly pale. For the first time, he felt like he couldn't win against the Origin Immortal Sword-wielding Wang Chong, and he even felt a tinge of fear. How could such a divine sword exist in the world? With this immortal sword here, my magic treasures won't be of any use at all. I have to leave. Bagushadu had always harbored a deep desire for the Origin Immortal Sword, but this time, he finally began to think of retreating. One Wang Chong, the evil emperor, and the chief of Wuxia. In the past, he would have had nothing to fear, but now that the Earthblood Cauldron was being countered by the Origin Immortal Sword, Bagushadu could no longer deal with 3 top-class half-step subtle experts at the same time. Bagushadu, do you think you can leave? Wang Chong's eyes were as sharp as lightning as he had long ago seen through Bagushadu's intentions. But Bagushadu was a man who hid a dagger behind his smile. Whether it was for himself or for the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong could not let him escape so easily. Void movement technique. Wang Chong's body swayed as he pushed the void movement technique he had learned from the man in black to its limit. His body rapidly approached Bagushadu, his 2 hands gripping his sword as he swung it down at Bagushadu with a momentum that could cleave apart the heavens. Boom boom boom. Stellar energy exploded and gales howled through the air. In the distance, Wang Chong and Bagushadu were locked in a fierce battle, the chains beneath their feet clattering and shaking, as if they would fall at any moment. On the chains, Wang Chong's attacks rained down on Bagushadu. In the face of Wang Chong's terrifying attacks and the cliffs on either side, Bagushadu had nowhere to run. Wang Chong's Origin Immortal Sword had slashed at the Earthblood Cauldron on Bagushadu's body several dozen times. Cackalack. Every time Wang Chang's 4-foot-long origin immortal sword struck the Earthblood Cauldron, a new crack would appear on it. He had struck the 3 Earthblood Cauldrons several dozen times, each blow heavy and powerful. After dozens of blows, Bagushida's Earthblood Cauldrons were covered in cracks. In some places, the cracks were as wide as a finger and seemed ready to shatter at any moment. King of foreign lands, you madman! Bagushida's long hair blew in the wind, and he was both shocked and furious. Wang Chang's attacks were frenzied, and a dark red torrent of stellar energy was constantly revolving around him. And on his shoulders, the signature red and gold symbols of the great yin-yang heaven creation art, the sun and moon, appeared at the same time in a dazzling display. Wang Chang had fully recovered his energy, and the great yin-yang heaven creation art was displaying its savage side. Not only was spiritual energy gathering in this underground space, even Bagushida's black stellar energy was restless, wanting to break out of his body and pour into Wang Chang's body. Without the powerful protection of the Earthblood Cauldron, Bagushidu alone could not stop Wang Chang's tyrannical great yin-yang heaven creation art. Bagushidu, accept your fate. Wang Chang's voice was cold and emotionless as it resounded through the world. Bang! As the two of them were speaking, the demonic emperor old man and the Wuxiang village chief silently shot out from behind them. Bum bum bum. Once, twice, thrice. In the face of the combined attacks of 3 supreme experts, Bagushida's stellar energy was rapidly consumed and growing weaker. Bagushidu couldn't even speak. But this was not the end. While Bagushidu was frantically trying to deal with these attacks, he suddenly heard a loud roar. Gong Gong divine art. Before Bagushidu could react, a massive whirlpool of water appeared above him. Dark clouds roiled as destructive energy fused with these waves. In the center of these waves, one could faintly make out the shape of a trident. At this crucial moment, Jili Laozu had finally struck. There were only 2 chains cast from 1,000-year-old frigid iron above the abyss, and the space was extremely small. Coupled with the fact that he couldn't find a good angle to strike, Jili Laozu had not done much until now. Instead, he had used the water element's ability to conceal his energy to find the best moment to strike. Boom! The 3 supreme experts of the world attacked at the same time, unleashing 3 destructive waves of stellar energy that slammed into Bagushida's stellar energy barrier. Not even someone of Bagushida's abilities could hold on against this terrifying attack. Thump thump thump. Bagushida's body trembled as he retreated several steps. The energy in his chest was in disarray, and blood was surging up, but Bagushida forcefully swallowed it back down. Chapter 1553. Bagushidu, take my attack. Art of God and Demon Obliteration. A furious roar came from behind Bagushidu, and Wang Chang's eyes shone like stars. While the evil emperor, chief of Wuxiang, and Jili Laozu were attacking Bagushidu, Wang Chang lunged forward and used his strongest technique. But this was not the great yin-yang heaven creation art that Wang Chang excelled in, but a powerful technique that Wang Chang had never used before. Rumble! In the blink of an eye, there was an earth-shattering boom. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed in the void. At the same time, Wang Chang's vast great yin-yang heaven creation art surged into the origin immortal sword. Under the effect of the origin immortal sword, the stellar energy cultivated from this illustrious martial arts of the martial arts world was rapidly compressed and transformed into new, denser, and more tyrannical particles of energy. Buzz! At this moment, Wang Chang's aura suddenly changed. If Wang Chang's aura at the start was as majestic as a mountain, then the current Wang Chang's aura was sharp and unsheathed, terrifying to the extreme. He gave off the feeling that he was a sharp sword that could cut through all things in the world and destroy all obstacles. No, this was no longer just a look. Wang Chang had truly transformed into a sharp sword. Bang! In the blink of an eye, Wang Chang had become one with his sword. A milky white sword more than 30 meters long and millions of times more dazzling than the sun. It slashed down at Bagushidu with astonishing speed. At this moment, Wang Chang was completely different from any other time. His body exuded a pure and vigorous destructive sword intent, that could pulverize all things in the world. What sword art is this? Let alone Bagushidu, even Wang Chang's master, the evil emperor, and the chief of Wuxiang grimaced. The new sword intent Wang Chong displayed was terrifying to the extreme, and it targeted the soul. The essence of the sword Dao was to annihilate all things in the world. This was the calamity of all living beings. Anyone who saw this sword would instinctively feel a fear from the depths of their soul. Art of God and Demon Obliteration. With the Origin Immortal Sword, Wang Chong was finally able to use this supreme sword art that was ranked second only to the Origin Immortal art. Not good. Sensing the terrifying sword chi behind him, Bagushidu paled and hurriedly turned around. At the same time, he gathered the power of his 3 earthblood cauldrons to block the attack. Bagushidu had reacted very quickly, but he had still underestimated this sword. Boom! A milky white radiance illuminated the world, and Wang Chong's sword chi was so fast that it cleaved space in two, leaving a wound in the air that was several dozen meters long. Bagushidu didn't even have time to bring out the full power of the 3 earthblood cauldrons before Wang Chong's sword cut a path through the 3 cauldrons. This terrifying sword chi was so fast that not even the mind could keep up. Swoosh! The sound of a sharp blade piercing through flesh resounded in Bagushidu's ears, and his entire body trembled as he sensed that a dreadful sword had pierced through his body. The destructive sword chi pierced through his body and split into thousands of strands, crazily blasting into his meridians. Every cell in Bagushidu's body felt like it had been plunged into winter, and all his vitality was severed, turning him gray. How could this be? Bagushidu's body trembled, and his eyes went wide. At this moment, he could clearly sense that the world before him had turned gray, like a somber autumn that had lost all color. In just one attack, Bagushidu had suffered an unprecedented wound. Ah! With a scream, Bagushidu was pierced through by the terrifying power of the art of God and Demon Obliteration, and his body was sent flying like a ragdoll. Rumble! From a distance, one could see a milky white beam of sword chi cleaving through the air, and Bagushidu was flying high into the air along the sword chi. Through the thick fog, he smashed into the wall near the other end of the passage. The force of this blow was so strong that it directly cracked the entire cave wall. The earth shook as if it were on the verge of collapse. Bagushidu's body creaked, blood gushing out of his pores, and countless bones in his body had been broken. Let's go! Bagushidu's face was filled with fear, and he had lost all courage to fight. He had never encountered such a terrifying sword chi before. The remnant sword chi remained in every cell in his body. After the battle ended, it continued to destroy the vitality in his body. With every moment that passed, Bagushidu's injuries worsened. But what left Bagushidu most fearful was the unstoppable sharpness of that sword. Bagushidu's powerful black stellar energy was completely incapable of stopping this sword. Bang! Bagushidu slammed his right hand against the wall behind him, and immediately charged toward the nearby passage. Bagushidu, do you think you can still run? At this moment, a cold voice came from behind, shaking the entire space. The evil emperor, the chief of Wuxiang, and Jili Laozu, these 3 titans of the martial arts world, attacked at the same time. 3 powerful waves of stellar energy shot through the air like comets, striking the fleeing Bagushidu. Ah! Bagushidu screamed, his vitality rapidly weakening. He was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished at any moment. No! Bagushidu's back was against the wall, his clothes in tatters and stained with blood. That pair of calm and calculating eyes suddenly widened. There was no calmness, no calculation, only the deepest fear. A single miscalculation had resulted in a complete defeat. The Origin Immortal Sword was so powerful that it could suppress ritual tools. This was something he had never imagined possible. And without the protection of the 3 earthblood cauldrons, not even Bagushidu could deal with the combined attacks of 4 top-class experts of the current era. Wang Chong and the demonic emperor working together could already suppress the Arab war god Qutayba, who had just reached the subtle realm. Now that the chief of Wuxiang and Jili Laozu had joined in, Bagushidu had no chance of surviving. Bang! Accompanied by an earth-shattering explosion, A majestic milky white sword chi illuminated the world behind the three of them, turning the dark underground world into a dazzling day. Bagushida didn't even have time to cover his eyes before he was engulfed by the milky white sword chi. And then everything went dark. Plush. As the sword chi faded, a disheveled head tumbled to the ground, leaving behind Bagushida's headless body, which slowly collapsed against the wall and became motionless. Behind him, there was a hole that was about 3 meters deep. It was pitch black and looked shocking to the eye. He's finally been killed. The moment Bagushida fell, several figures flew through the fog toward the stone bridge. Of all these people, Jili Laozu was the first to arrive. As he stared at Bagushida's corpse, Jili Laozu breathed a long sigh of relief. Bagushidu, the Earth Sect master of the Eastern Turks, had been far too dangerous. In front of 4 people, and even the third-generation successor, he had managed to launch a sneak attack and capture Wang Chong. None of them had been a match for him. But in the end, this peerless expert of the Northeast, whose name had shaken the Tang dynasty, and the Eastern Turks had died at the hands of 4 people. The reversal was so massive that for a moment, Jili Laozu's mind was in a daze, not daring to believe that this terrifying existence of the dark radiant heaven had really died. "How are you?" At this moment, Chief of Wuxiang, leaning on his cane, was the second to arrive. "I'm fine." Jili Laozu shook his head. "But this fellow can't be any more dead. Without Bagushidu, the Earth Sect of the Eastern Turks will fall into chaos for some time. Last time, Ishinishidu used his supreme divine ability to send the Earth Blood Cauldron back to the surface. But this time, the Earth Sect won't be so lucky." As Jili Laozu spoke, he glanced at the 3 cauldrons at Bagushida's side. These 3 powerful ritual tools renowned throughout the Northeast had been covered in cracks by Wang Chong's attack. In some places, there were even cracks that were more than half an inch wide, like corroded steel. It was a ghastly sight. Just this alone was enough to cripple half of the cauldron's power. Without several hundred years of repair, they would never be able to recover. Truly, everything has its vanquisher. Bagushidu was renowned in the northeastern region of Yuzhou for his schemes, intelligence, and formidable martial arts. But who could have imagined that this Grand Master of the Earth Sect would die at the hands of a teenaged boy? Bagushidu, you've truly provoked the wrong person. Jili Laozu mentally sighed. In this battle, Bagushidu seemed to have been defeated by the combined efforts of the 4 of them. But Jili Laozu was well aware that this was all because of the strength of the Tang dynasty's king of foreign lands. If not for him, they would have had no chance of victory. In truth, before Wang Chong had charged up the chain and onto the altar, the situation had been extremely unfavorable for them. With Bagushidu firmly in his grasp, the death of the third-generation successor had made it impossible for Jili Laozu to leave alone. Chapter 1554. Even Jili Laozu found it hard to believe that Wang Chong only had a third of his strength, that he had to deal with the first-generation guardian, the divine sword, and that Bagushidu had buried the Earth Sect's forbidden art, the Dark Moon's flame, in his body. This youth seemed to possess limitless potential, and there seemed to be nothing he couldn't do. This was probably the existence in the world that could not be provoked. It's over. While Jili Laozu was sighing, the evil emperor had also stepped over the chains, crossed the stone bridge, and reached the surface. He didn't even glance at Bagushidu. A Turkic expert coveting the origin immortal treasury wasn't much to him. This is a dangerous place, and we can't stay here for long. Chonga, did you obtain the origin immortal art? The evil emperor turned to Wang Chong. No, but I did find Senior Zhou's formation divine tome. Executing the wild goose descending the sand form, Wang Chong slowly descended to the ground from behind. What? The demonic emperor old man and Wuxiang village chief both trembled at these words, their faces paling. Even Jili Laozu turned his head in shock. The origin immortal lord had set up such a chasm, with a first-generation guardian, and a divine sword guarding it, and this was the very core of the origin immortal treasury. How could there not be an origin immortal art? Moreover, they had clearly seen Wang Chong ascend the altar, pull out his sword, and take out a few things. I don't know what's going on either, But I feel like the origin Immortal Lord's treasury isn't that simple. There's probably another world here. And there might be some other mechanism or other changes. In short, it can't be that simple, Wang Chong sternly said. In an instant, the three of them frowned deeply. Putting Jili Laozu aside, the evil emperor and the chief of Wuxiang knew that Wang Chong would never lie to them. If he said no, then it must be true. If there's nothing on the altar, then this is going to be troublesome. The evil emperor remained silent. For the first time, he felt troubled. It was said that the origin Immortal Lord had the ability to foresee the future. If Wang Chong had not found it, it meant that this legendary expert had other plans. But the troublesome thing was that there wasn't much time left for them. And without the origin immortal art, the incomplete Great Yin-Yang Heaven creation art would always be a flaw. Boom! Just as the two of them were talking, the ground suddenly shook. Then, a series of footsteps, accompanied by the noise of people, came from the tunnel. Hearing this voice, the four of them shuddered, and a look of shock appeared on their faces. This was the core of the treasury, and it was guarded by generations of walking corpses. It was simply too difficult. Even Wang Chong and Bagushidu had only been able to avoid the second-generation successor and enter this place. But based on the sound of the footsteps, it was clear that many people had entered the tunnel. What's going on? Why are there so many people? Jili Laozu's eyes went wide in disbelief. The demonic emperor old man, Wuxiang village chief, and the others had the same thoughts. However, before everyone could react, the auras rapidly approached, and at the same time, a wave of panicked shouts came from the passageway like a landslide and a tsunami. Run! They're coming! Out of the way! Out of the way! Ah, we're going to die! Get out of my way! What are you afraid of? We have so many people. Can't we deal with them? If you want to die, go! Don't stop us. Not good, they're catching up. Boom! A martial artist with disheveled hair and a ghastly complexion charged out of the tunnel. Behind him, a flood of martial artists surged forward, charging into the area where Wang Chong's group was located. Behind them, a large number of experts were still rushing over. This sudden sight left Wang Chong and the others dumbfounded. What's going on here? Wang Chong was flabbergasted by the panic and fear of the martial artists. These martial artists clearly didn't have the strength to easily reach this place. Just the second-generation successor was enough to keep all of them at bay. But what left Wang Chong even more shocked was what happened behind him. Roar! There was a heaven-shaking roar. And then the entire tunnel began to fiercely tremble. Dust and dirt began to fall from the walls and the ceiling above Wang Chong's group. The Blacking Ancestor. Wang Chong's pupils constricted as he instantly recognized that extremely dark and turbid evil path energy. Not only that, Wang Chong also sensed the auras of the Bone Devil Ancestor and the myriad ghost ancestor behind the Blacking Ancestor. These three titans of the evil path of the Five Ancestor Alliance had also arrived. Out of the way. This one will kill anyone who dares to stop me. The Blacking Ancestor's ruthless voice resounded through the air. Boom boom boom. A moment later, screams filled the tunnel as Wang Chong's group watched one martial artist after another fly out like ragdolls. In the blink of an eye, black smoke billowed, and a huge black dragon head that looked incomparably ferocious squeezed out of the passage that was taller than a person. Thump! The Blacking Ancestor's black dragon form flew out of the passage, and the Bone Devil Ancestor and myriad ghost ancestor followed closely behind him. The three evil path ancestors no longer had their usual arrogance and haughtiness. On the contrary, they seemed rather apprehensive and fearful, as if something dreadful was chasing them. Not good. There's a cliff up ahead. With panicked cries, the martial artists who had charged in quickly realized that there was a bottomless abyss in front of them. In a flash, the core region was thrown into chaos. In the rear, the martial artists seemed to be being driven away, all of them fighting to be the first to charge out of the passage. As for the main characters of this incident, Wang Chong, the evil emperor, and Jili Laozu, they had been forgotten. For a moment, no one paid them any attention. Buzz! More and more people gathered in the core region. At this moment, another powerful aura appeared in everyone's perception like a storm. It's Song Yuanyi. A familiar voice rang out. It was Jili Laozu. As experts of the martial arts world, they had fought before. So Jili Laozu was extremely familiar with Song Yuanyi's energy. In truth, Song Yuanyi's eternal spring mantra's energy was so unique that no one in the world could imitate it. What's going on? Wang Chong, the evil emperor, Jili Laozu, and the chief of Wuxia glanced at each other, all of them sensing a deep unease in each other's eyes. Putting aside the others, even the Blackeen ancestor, the Bone Devil ancestor, the Myriad Ghost ancestor, and Song Yuanyi, these titans of the martial arts world, had been forced to flee in panic, driven to the core region. This was not something an ordinary person could do. Assume formation. A few moments later, a series of harsh shouts came from the passage. The experts of the Jingqi League charged out of the passage, surging toward the right side. Unlike the rest of the chaotic crowd, these people immediately formed a formation the moment they appeared. They lined up neatly and were ready for battle. Bang bang! In a flash of white light, two figures with majestic energy charged out of the passage like a storm. They made a sharp turn in the air and immediately landed in front of the Jingqi League group. Everyone hear my order. Activate the 7 lore formation. Song Yuanyi and Xie Guangding stood side by side, their expressions unprecedentedly solemn. Their gazes swept across the crowd and exchanged glances with Wang Chong and the evil emperor. Without pausing, they quickly turned to the cave entrance. Wang Chong's heart instantly sank. He knew of Song Yuanyi's personality. This person was extremely stubborn. From the northwest border all the way to the underground region, this person's heart had been steeled. No matter what the situation was, he had always wanted to exterminate Wang Chong and the evil emperor. But just now, when Wang Chong had met his gaze, Song Yuanyi had not paused and immediately turned to look at the cave entrance. This could only mean one thing. In Song Yuanyi's mind, the impending danger was far more important than killing Wang Chong and the demonic emperor. Bang! As if in response to Wang Chong's thoughts, the air in the passage exploded, and a dreadful energy swept out of the passage. Aya! Screams filled the air, as the tinsome martial artists at the very back were caught up to by this destructive energy. Screaming, they were sent flying out of the passage. Thud thud thud. Tinsome sect martial artists crashed into the crowd, exploding into a bloody mess, and sending severed limbs flying through the air. The moment he landed on the ground, he had already lost all signs of life, and turned into a corpse. Ah! Cries of alarm rang out in the crowd. Countless martial artists paled and hurriedly retreated in fright. There was an extremely terrifying and unsettling atmosphere in the air. Hihei, none of you will be leaving here alive today. At this moment a cold, emotionless sneer came from the passageway. Boom! Before the crowd could react, another corpse flew out from the passageway and smashed into the restless crowd outside the cave. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, dust billowed out, and miserable shrieks rang out as countless people were smashed into by the corpses and sent flying backward. The corpse that had been thrown out of the passage slid for Tinsum Zhang, almost off the cliff, before finally coming to a stop. Wang Chong had been standing on the left side of the passage. When that corpse had been thrown out, Wang Chong had sensed a scorching energy within it, and then he had sensed nothing. This person was far more powerful and frightening than he had imagined. Chapter 1555. Second Generation. Wang Chong's eyes widened as he finally lost his composure. The corpse that had been thrown out of the cave was head down and feet up, making it impossible to see its face. But Wang Chong was able to recognize it at a glance from the ancient robes of the Western Han Dynasty. Clang! Soon after, a cold light flashed, and a long sword was thrown out from inside, smashing to the ground. Wang Chong only glanced at it before his heart sank. This was the second-generation sword. Wang Chong had been very close to the second-generation sword as he had passed through the underground palace, so he was extremely familiar with the patterns on it, the shape of the hilt, and everything else. If he could only guess because he couldn't see the face, then the second-generation sword that had been thrown out of the tunnel was a clear indication of everything. How could this be? Wang Chang's mind reeled in shock. At this moment, he suddenly understood why the crowd was so terrified, and why these ordinary martial artists had been able to smoothly make their way here. It's them. A thought flitted through Wang Chang's mind, and he instantly understood what was going on. The second generation had already reached the subtle realm, and with the power of the origin immortal art, not even many subtle realm experts would be a match for him. And in the entire operation, in the entire cavern, the only ones who had the qualifications and ability to destroy the second King Yanluo were probably those few people. Walala. A few moments later, as if responding to Wang Chang's thoughts, there was a flash of light, and a large group of people surged out of the narrow passage. Unlike the martial artists who had come out earlier, these people had vicious eyes but much calmer expressions. Careful! They're coming out! The appearance of these men in black immediately caused the crowd to grow restless. An uneasy atmosphere pervaded the air. The martial artists' eyes were wide open, their throats swallowing, their foreheads dripping with cold sweat, their faces revealing clear fear and alarm. Wang Chong said nothing, but his expression turned grim. Everything was clear. After delaying for so long, these mysterious and powerful black-clothed men had finally arrived at the core area. This was not the first time Wang Chong had dealt with these people, and he knew that they were vicious and merciless. Most importantly, these people were terrifyingly strong. I'm afraid today's matter won't end well. Wang Chong's heart sank as he said to himself. And at this moment, buzz! There were new changes in the passageway. 3 powerful auras suddenly appeared in everyone's perception. They were like blazing suns. In the core region, those who could survive the layers of traps were all experts. However, compared to these 3 auras, he was as insignificant as an ant. Rumble! The ground quaked, and in the blink of an eye, 3 figures appeared. Their movements were calm, and their eyes were filled with disdain. Their faces were covered with golden masks, and they looked like gods who had descended to the mortal world. They slowly walked out of the passageway and appeared before everyone's eyes. As soon as the 3 of them appeared, the air seemed to solidify, and 3 invisible waves of pressure, as heavy as mountains, swept out in all directions. Even Song Yuanyi, Xie Guangting, the Black Yin ancestor, the Bone Devil ancestor, and the myriad ghost ancestor tensed up, as if they were facing a powerful foe. For the first time, they appeared rather nervous. 3 people. The sight of this godlike golden-masked man in black shrouded in golden light caused Wang Chong, the evil emperor, the chief of Wuxiang, and Jili Laozu to grimace in shock. One of these 3 people was someone the 4 of them had met before. It was none other than the man with the 3-eyed deer mask, who had appeared on the surface of the Origin Immortal Formation, and used his pair of giant golden hands to tear apart the Origin Immortal Formation's barrier. This man had a cold expression and sharp eyes, and his body was brimming with destructive energy. He was clearly a supreme expert of the subtle realm. Once one reached the subtle realm, one would be on a completely different level from the vast majority of martial artists in the mortal world, including peak great generals. Wang Chong and the others had already experienced this for themselves. The man with the 3-eyed deer mask possessed unfathomable strength, and he was not even the slightest bit weaker than the second-generation successor. As for the other 2, one of them wore a golden goat mask with 4 black horns on it, while the other wore a golden red tiger mask. They looked as mighty as hell, mysterious and unfathomable. The 4-horned goat masked man was a little weaker than the man with the 3-eyed deer mask, but the man with the golden red tiger mask exuded a vast sea of energy that was even more frightening than the other 2. In fact, from his position in the middle, it could be seen that the strength, identity, and status of this newly arrived man with the golden red tiger mask was actually above that of the man with the 3-eyed deer mask who had arrived earlier. One man with the 3-eyed deer mask was already extremely difficult to deal with, and Wang Chong had never imagined that another expert in black would appear, perhaps even stronger. Wang Chong's heart sank, and his face twisted into a nasty grimace. Don't let a single one escape. At this moment, the man with the golden red tiger mask in the middle suddenly spoke. An enormous aura like an avalanche engulfed the entire battlefield. Before this aura, even Song Yuanyi, the Blackine ancestor, and the others paled in comparison. As he spoke, countless men in black surged in behind him, with the 3 bamboo hat men standing out the most. Besides these 3, there were 4 or 5 other experts who were no weaker than the 3 bamboo hat men. It's over. We're doomed. Just who are they? Why are they doing this? It can't be. I won't die here. I'll fight them to the death. As the fog churned, an atmosphere of despair and panic began to spread through the crowd. Looking down from a high vantage point, one could see that the countless martial artists in the vicinity of the small passage were retreating. Bastard! No matter what, you won't succeed. A woman's shrill curses resounded through the underground core, her voice particularly harsh in the chaos of the crowd. Following the voice, Wang Chong saw that the man with the golden red tiger mask had raised an arm, his fingers gripping the neck of a middle-aged woman, like a pair of pincers. This woman's hair was in disarray, her expression mournful, and her eyes were suffused with deep hatred. It's her. Wang Chong didn't recognize her at first glance, but when he saw the familiar white robe the woman wore, Wang Chong immediately understood. The woman being gripped by the man with the golden red tiger mask was none other than the Origin Immortal Village chief, who had appeared in Greenfire Cave. The metal mask she had been wearing had long ago fallen off her face, and her aura was in disarray, making her seem extremely weak. Blood trickled from the corner of her lips, and it was apparent that she had been tortured. As expected, she still ended up in their hands. Wang Chong raised an eyebrow. In the underground river, he had heard at least 3 tremors caused by large mechanisms. Even though she had ended up in the hands of the 3 men in black, it was apparent that this Origin Immortal Village chief had made them suffer. Foolish woman, we have plenty of ways to make you talk. Even if you used all the mechanisms you could, in the end, we still ended up here. Don't think that just because you won't talk, we won't be able to get what we want out of you. Right at this moment, the tall and skinny man with the 4-horned goat mask on the far left suddenly spoke, his voice extremely cold. Someone, bring out those captives from the Origin Immortal Village. The man with the 4-horned goat mask waved a hand behind him, and the men in black quickly escorted 7 or 8 members of the Origin Immortal Village. Other than some ordinary Origin Immortal villagers, there were also quite a few elders of the Origin Immortal Village. Swish! Without the slightest hesitation, one of the men in black swung down his saber and beheaded an Origin Immortal Village chief. The headless body fell to the ground, blood gushing out of it. Bastard! You bastards! I won't let you get away with this. The Origin Immortal Village chief seemed to be greatly provoked by this sight. Her eyes went red, and her body twisted and struggled as she let out heart-wrenching curses. Kill a few more. Kill that elder as well. The man with the 3-eyed deer mask on the right gave the order, his voice even colder and crueler than that of the man with the 4-horned goat mask. The 4 men in black immediately stepped forward, each of them standing next to an Origin Immortal Village chief. Bastard! You bastards! Even if I become a ghost, I won't let you get away with this. The Origin Immortal villagers madly cursed, their eyes bursting with hatred. They struggled with all their might, but with their energy sealed, they could not escape. Crack! With this order, 3 of the Origin Immortal villagers fell to the ground without a sound, blood gushing out of their bodies and spreading through their bodies. Now it's your turn. At this moment, one of the black-clothed experts, no weaker than the 3 bamboo hat men, walked up to the white-bearded Origin Immortal elder and pressed his sword against the elder's neck. The sharp edge of the sword immediately left a deep gash on the elder's neck, from which blood gushed out. There's no need for such trouble. Since she won't speak, kill the rest of the Origin Immortal villagers. These Origin Immortal Village descendants no longer have the right to exist in this world. Right at this moment, a dignified and sonorous voice resounded. The voice was sonorous and revealed a domineering and tyrannical aura that shook the hearts of all. At this moment, the leader of the group, the man with the golden red tiger mask, spoke. Chapter 1556. Yes. The black-clothed men bowed, and immediately walked behind the remaining Origin Immortal villagers, preparing to execute them. In addition, a group of ants followed us all the way here. Go to mortal, cut the weeds and pull out the roots. I leave this matter to you. The tiger-masked man said, his words the straw that broke the camel's back. Beast! You damned beasts! I'll tell you. Let them go. And I'll tell you everything. The Origin Immortal village chief was hysterical and on the verge of collapse. All these men in black were callous and decisive assassins. Once they gave the order, there would be no room for negotiation. Once the tiger-masked man gave the order, the Origin Immortal villagers, that had existed for more than 1,000 years, would be completely wiped out. You bastards, all of you will die a horrible death. A shrill howl resounded through the air. Buzz! But a moment later, the tiger-masked man pulled back his wrist and raised the hysterical Origin Immortal village chief, less than half an inch from his face. Foolish woman, are you cursing a god? Death has no meaning to us. Just tell me the answer I want. The tiger-masked man coldly said. An enormous stream of psychic energy erupted from his body and connected him to the Origin Immortal village chief. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have acted in the first place. A few moments later, the tiger-masked man tossed the Origin Immortal village chief to the ground. Buzz! A moment later, the tiger-masked man extended a finger and lightly flicked it. A golden-red strand of stellar energy condensed into metallic particles that began to twist and transform in the air. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed into an Origin Immortal diagram, more than 2 meters in diameter, that slowly revolved in the air, as if it had a life of its own. Boom! The tiger-masked man extended his right hand and thrust his palm at the Origin Immortal diagram. A moment later, the air trembled and the earth rumbled. Dust and gravel rained down from the sky, while the thick fog beneath the ground began to seethe. With a loud bang, the void trembled. The man with the golden-red tiger mask seemed to have opened some kind of restriction in the void. In the next moment, the earth trembled, and countless rocks fell from the surrounding cavern walls. Not far from the 3 men in black, the ground split open, and a mysterious bronze pillar extended out from the ground. The surface of this pillar was covered in patterns, and there were many ancient runes on the surface, as well as some pictures of ancient beasts. It looked dignified, solemn, and mysterious. Everyone watched as the man with the golden-red tiger mask slowly walked forward. In an instant, everyone noticed that there was an overarching disc protruding from the top of the bronze pillar. The man with the golden-red tiger mask walked up and pressed the disc on the top. He rotated it twice and then slammed it down with a bang. However, nothing happened around them. This sudden turn of events left everyone dumbfounded. Master! Wang Chong subconsciously turned to the evil emperor, but the latter shook his head and stopped Wang Chong. Whether it's the Origin Immortal villagers or these men in black, they're our enemies, not our friends. The men in black might want to kill us, but the Origin Immortal villagers won't let us go either. And based on what they've done, this Origin Immortal treasury probably has its own paradise. Don't act recklessly. Let's wait and see. Whether it was Wang Chong, the evil emperor, or the chief of Wuxia, they were all top-class experts of the current era. But this was only for the experts on the surface. And these men in black belonged to no faction. Not even people like Wang Chong, who had interacted with them on many occasions, knew anything about their background, much less anyone else. Wang Chong said nothing, only slightly creased his brow as he subconsciously scanned his surroundings. Everyone around him, including Song Yuani and the Blackine ancestor, had wary and cautious expressions on their faces. They had no intention of acting recklessly. It was clear to see that they were extremely afraid of these men in black. On the other side, the man with the golden-red tiger mask was frowning. He seemed to be lost in thought because of what was happening in front of him, but very quickly his brows relaxed, as if he immediately understood. The tiger-masked man coldly snorted, and without even turning his head, he thrust out a palm. Nearby, the Origin Immortal village chief that he had left behind was pulled by an invisible thread into the tiger-masked man's hand. Swish! There was a burst of bloody light as the tiger-masked man used a finger to cut the Origin Immortal village chief's arm, causing a spray of blood to splash onto the bronze pillar. The dark red blood immediately seeped into the interior of the bronze pillar, as if it had met a sponge. A few moments later, it was completely sucked dry. Rumble, accompanied by an earth-shattering noise, the bronze pillar that was as tall as a human suddenly retracted into the ground. Immediately after, the earth rumbled, and a loud cracking sound came from the depths of the earth. There was also the sound of gears turning. What's going on here? Is there some kind of mechanism underground? Cries of alarm rang out as the crowd began to back away, fearful that they might fall into some sort of trap. Just what are these scoundrels looking for? If it was just the Origin Immortal art, would they need to go through so much trouble? All the martial artists looked fearful, shocked, and doubtful. These black-clothed men always gave them a strange feeling, as if they were incompatible with the rest of the group. Meanwhile, Wang Chong remained silent, hidden in the crowd. Unlike the others, he had powerful psychic energy, and the moment the bronze pillar retracted into the ground, he had clearly sensed a powerful ripple traveling through the ground to the top of the abyss. As the ripple traveled upward, it grew fainter and fainter, until it was almost inaudible. Silence, incomparable silence. Everyone was on standby, silently observing the progress and changes of the matter. At this moment, even the black-clothed men silently raised their heads and looked at the endless sky covered by the thick fog, waiting silently. Time ticked by, and just when the atmosphere was at its most frozen, looking up, Wang Chong was the first to sense something. In just a short moment, rumble could be heard from above the bottomless abyss. It was as if some colossal creature had been shaken. The sound wasn't obvious at first, but as time went on, it became deafening and became more and more intense. Look over there. At this moment, someone looked up and suddenly cried out, "Rumble!" In the next moment, the air whistled sharply, and a dazzling golden light expanded before everyone's eyes. Like a comet crashing into the earth, it suddenly plummeted downwards at an extremely fast speed. At first glance, this golden light was only the size of a sesame seed, at least 8,000 or 9,000 meters away. But in the blink of an eye, this sesame seed had swelled to hundreds of thousands of times its original size, transforming into a massive golden sphere. And within this golden sphere, there seemed to be something else. Not good. Careful. The comet-like light was incomparably blazing. The golden light that erupted from his body was like a scorching sun, illuminating the dark underground as if it was daytime. Rumble. In less than a few breaths of time, the huge golden ball of light smashed fiercely at the end of the chain, at the ancient altar that was floating in midair. The golden ball of light plummeted from the sky, its power terrifying and powerful. The moment it hit the ground, the air boomed and exploded, sending waves of energy sweeping out in all directions. Thump thump. A martial artist on the edge of the cliff was unable to react in time, and was struck by the waves of energy. Screams rang out as they were sent tumbling through the air. The martial artists that had calmed down immediately fell into chaos. Just what is that thing? Boom! Wang Chong spread out the stellar energy in his body, his eyes completely drawn to the golden ball of light falling from the sky. As the dust churned and the shockwave of energy swept through the area, Wang Chong looked in the direction of the explosion. How could this be? Even though Wang Chong had already mentally prepared himself, the sight of the ball of light on the distant altar still caused his body to tremble and a hint of shock to appear on his face. As he walked along the stone bridge and passed through two thick chains, Wang Chong saw a flickering golden light in the center of the thick fog. And within the flickering light, there was actually an ancient palace hall. This palace was decorated with flying eaves and dazzling golden walls. It exuded a grandeur that transcended time and space. For a moment, Wang Chong felt like he had passed through the surging flood of history and returned to the spring and autumn and warring states periods. That solemn, imposing, ancient, and solemn aura aroused reverence in one's heart and caused one to gasp in admiration. With just a glance, Wang Chong's attention was drawn to the golden characters written on the signboard of the palace. The Origin Immortal Palace. The words on the signboard exuded a majestic and oppressive aura, as if a god was looking down on the world. It really is the Origin Immortal Palace. Wang Cheng's body trembled as an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. Although he hadn't obtained the Origin Immortal art from the core of the treasury, Wang Cheng had vaguely sensed that this adventure was not as simple as it seemed. There seemed to be something else hidden behind the trial of the first-generation successor and the Origin Immortal sword. But that was just a guess, and he couldn't see anything else from the core. If not for these men in black, Wang Cheng would have never imagined that the core of the treasury was hiding something else. The true treasury was actually hidden high above his head. These men in black knew that there was a secret here. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.